What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here for the Rip City Drive. Scotty Scheffler is the winner of the British Open and the iconic Claret Jug after casually dominating the field this weekend. Scheffler finished minus 17 under par and took the jug by 4 strokes over second place Harris English. NBA veteran Chris Paul has agreed to a one-year deal with the Clippers, reuniting him with his longtime franchise, his 21st and expected final season in the NBA. Damian Lillard's return to Portland press conference will get underway at 6 p.m. tonight. Stay tuned to Rip City Radio 620 for live coverage. Coming up on the big show, we got a jam-packed 3 hours for you, including the Godfather Dwight James in studio and catching up with PGA David Coleman to talk some Open. You've got the Rip City Drive on a Monday. Welcoming you into the Rip City Drive here on a Monday afternoon. Brendan Slaughter filling in for Chad doing today as he's out at the We Play Golf Foundation tournament. So I'm on tap for you guys today. We've got an awesome show planned out for you over the next 4 hours. Not only do you get 3 hours of awesome Rip City Drive with me, Brendan Slaughter, we've got a special edition of Trailblazers Courtside tonight starting at 6 p.m., where we will carry Damian Lillard's return to Portland press conference live. That's going to be happening at Moda Center tonight. At 6 o'clock, you can catch it right here at Rip City Radio. And make sure to call in. We're going to have some reaction afterwards. It's going to be a fun hour in the 6 p.m. hour with Dame Dalla back in Portland. Coming up on today's show here in about 20 minutes, I'm going to tell you one of my most memorable Damian Lillard stories. As soon as I had got the news, I was off a couple days last week when Dame announced that he was going to be coming back to Portland, and that news broke. And immediately, I thought of this story that I had with Dame back in winter of 2016, and was when I wasn't really even working in sports. So we'll be getting into that coming up here in about 20 minutes. I'm very excited to share that story because I don't think I've told too many people. It's almost like a little secret insider knowledge. Nothing bad, of course, but just, something that I haven't shared, and definitely a fun experience involving Dame. So we'll get to that here in about 20 minutes. At 4:20, we'll have the Godfather Dwight James live in studio. He's going to join us on his way to the Damian Lillard press conference. Nice enough to swing by the old iHeart Studios here as we're conveniently in between Dwight and the Moda Center. So very excited to catch up with the Godfather. I got a bevy of questions for him. Want to get his take on Dame being back, the good, maybe even the, questionable, I'll say. Trading for Jrue Holiday, Young Hansen, and much more. I'm real excited to get the Godfather's thoughts. It's been since I hosted back a month or so ago when I caught up with Dwight. So lots of great things there, and you got to love the Godfather's opinions, man. He's seen it all, and I'm very excited to hear what he thinks about something that I didn't really think was all that possible with Dame coming back. Like when the news broke that he was released from Milwaukee, that just blew me away. I remember, seeing that notification and being like, wow. Then it leaked, I believe, from Chris Haynes with a few teams like, look at Boston, a few others that I can't recall off the top of my head, but, a few others. And then there was and Portland. And you're like, okay, maybe that's just thrown out there because, Dame, really enjoyed his time here, so on and so forth. And, now we learned there was really more that met the eye there. Dame was serious about wanting to come back to Portland, be with his fans, or be with his family, be back in front of a fan base that absolutely adores him. And, there's a lot to like there. So, we'll get into all that with Dwight at 4:20. And then at 5:20, we'll be talking to PGA David Coleman. And, man, I am so excited to talk to Dave and basically ask him the question we all want to know. Scotty Scheffler like a golf robot? Is he an alien? Like, because the level of dominance that he has shown is creeping up on Tiger-like in his prime, and he just continues to roll downhill. I mean, it is literally a Goliath type situation with what Scotty Scheffler and just the chasm he is able to put between him and the competition. It's astounding in some ways. And, just to, as I mentioned in an update, just another ho-hum, Scotty Scheffler winning a major by multiple strokes. I mean, he just makes the difficult look easy. And then you throw in the fact that he's probably the most, humble superstar in any sport right now, just as far as he separates golf and life. He said very clearly that golf is number 3 in his life behind faith and family. And I love that. I love seeing a guy who can kind of separate and not just be a golfer and like seek the spotlight 24/7, because he is the best golfer in the world. There is no doubt about it. And he keeps going on the pace he's on and stays healthy and all those things. He's going to have a real shot to, be one of the best golfers we've ever seen. So very excited to talk some more with PGA Dave in hour number 3. And yeah, that's pretty much the show today, folks. It's going to be a good one, as I mentioned. We'll be talking Dame pretty heavily, but also got to switch into the U.S. Open. A couple other tidbits I want to get to. There's, a few stories out there. Memphis and what their quest, and I should say failed quest, to join the Big 12. We might get into that a little bit later in the program, as Memphis was a longtime target of the Pac-12. It didn't work for largely buyout reasons from what I've heard behind the scenes, but now that they basically went hat in hand to the Big 12, and the Big 12's like, yeah, no, we're just not messing with you. And when I read that story, I was just kind of like, wow, okay, they offered, from what I read, Memphis and their board of directors have some pretty big, heavy hitters, and they brought some big time sponsorship deals to the table. From what I read, I believe the owner of FedEx sits on the board of trustees for Memphis. Forget, there's one other big time company. And again, if you look it up right now, you definitely would find it. But just the amount of kind of backhanded support that Memphis is getting from big time donors. They were trying to really make a charge to push their way into a power conference. And from what I heard, Brett Yormark and the Big 12 were like, yeah, we're not interested. So does that mean that now they'll go hat in hand even more to the Pac-12? And because, you look at the Pac-12 now, I'm not saying that they're set in stone, but they're solvent. Like they don't need to do anything. By getting Texas State and completing the conference with 8 football playing teams, 9 teams overall, the Pac-12 has, lived to fight another day, quite literally. And as I mentioned to others, they're sitting on still a pretty good war chest worth of resources from their court wins and everything else when the Pac-12 collapsed. So I've seen a lot of people, throw out there that, Pac-12 should be interested in Memphis or vice versa. And I had heard that Memphis's buyout was a big time problem, something in the $30 to $35 million range. And if they come up with it themselves, I think that might be an attractive situation for the Pac-12. But I don't really think, now that they're content and they want to see what this new future is with these new 9 total schools, and they won't feel forced to expand. And in the case of Memphis, you kind of snooze, you lose. I know the Pac-12 was interested in them far before they were interested in, Texas State. Respectfully, I think Texas State was one of the last-ditch options to kind of, put a stamp down, get that, conference locked in, and eventually start drawing up future conference games, as the new Pac-12 will debut in 2026. So lots to get into there as well. But ultimately, I really don't see too much, I don't really know if I'll see anything happening with Memphis. They're probably going to stay in the now American, which dropped Athletic, and are really doubling down as, quote, the America Conference, which I think is kind of interesting too. So the world of college sports, it just continues to evolve, continues to change, and man, it really doesn't seem like it's gonna the carousel is gonna stop spinning anytime soon. So again, that's pretty much the plan, folks. We got a few more minutes here before we take our first break. Let's get into some audio from yesterday. There's a lot to get into from the British Open, and obviously, as we mentioned, Scotty Scheffler really ran away with the competition. But I want to hear from Rory McIlroy real quick, as Rory talked about just Scotty's dominance on the course and Rory finished tied for 7th. He had a pretty good day, just not quite enough to match essentially the Scotty Scheffler machine.
Look, I'm really pleased with my week. I wish I had been closer to Scotty going into today and being able to make a real push, but he's been on a different level all week, and he's been on a different level for the last 2 years to the rest of us. And he is the bar that we're all trying to get to at this point. So hats off to him. He's an unbelievable player, an incredible champion, and a great person too. So none of us could live with what he had this week, but for me to be in front of everyone here at home and to get that reception up the last, absolutely incredible. I'll remember that for a long time.
There were a couple moments that stood out there with what Rory was saying. We've all been chasing Scotty for about 2 years, and just you can hear that Rory's like, I played a pretty good couple days of golf. And, we've seen recently where Rory's maybe struggled and he has like one bad day and can't quite make it up. Rory had a pretty consistent 4 days, I would say. It was just, again, Scotty Scheffler sets the bar so freaking high that you really don't have much of an answer for it. So I thought that was particularly impressive. We'll hear with Scotty, or we'll hear from Scotty here in just a little bit, but I also want to hear from Jordan Spieth, who also had some thoughts on Scotty Scheffler's dominance.
He doesn't care to be a superstar. He's not transcending the game like Tiger did. He's not bringing it to non-golf audience necessarily. He doesn't want to go do, the stuff that, a lot of us go do corporately, anything like that. He just wants to get away from the game and separate the two, because I know that he, at one time felt it was too much, that he was taking it with him. And, whenever he made that switch, I don't know when it was, but, he has hobbies. He's always with his family. They're always doing stuff. I think it's more so the difference in personality from any other superstar that you've seen in the modern era and maybe any sport.
It wasn't the whole clip from Jordan Spieth, but he also went on to basically say that Scotty Scheffler is humble and just unassuming of a superstar as Nikola Jokic. And I thought the comparison, while two very different people, obviously Nikola Jokic is, a European guy, and Scotty Scheffler is right here in America, and, there's not a lot of similarities. But when you think about how, Scotty Scheffler is the best golfer in the world, but to what Jordan Spieth just said, he's not seeking the commercials. He's not seeking the limelight. He's not, clamoring for media. It's just not his jam. I remember going into this British Open when I was with Chad last week, and we were talking about, he was talking about just how Scotty, he doesn't get too high or too low after tournaments, and there's kind of a big anticipation, and then it's move on to the next. And in a lot of ways, Nikola Jokic is similar. It's pound for pound, you're not going to change my opinion. Nikola Jokic is the best basketball player on the planet. But at times, you're just wondering with Nikola, you're is he necessarily thrilled to do this, or is it kind of more of a job? Because we know Nikola Jokic, his relaxation time is playing racing horses back in Serbia. So I think it's classically one of those things where different personalities require different things. Everybody wants different things out of their non-work life. And I think it's an apt comparison that Scotty and Nikola, maybe the two best players in their respective sports, are just kind of yeah, I dominate, but I like my life outside of dominating too. And, I respect that. It's definitely an interesting take. Not all superstars are like that. You're not going to see a wave of superstars starting like that, but I think it's kind of against the grain. I think it's kind of cool. All right, we'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, I've got an awesome story to tell you guys about Damian Lillard and an experience I had meeting Dame back in 2016. Keep it locked on the Rip City Drive. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Monday. Hope everyone's having a great afternoon so far. Whether you're getting done with work, starting work, on your way home from work, wherever you're listening to us. At the gym, we appreciate you. And thanks for tuning in to Rip City Radio. Also can check out our YouTube at Rip City Radio 620. Get on there, join the conversation, get in on the chat. Let's talk. Let's talk some Blazers. Anything you want. Also 503-248-0620 is your telephone number. You can call. We can talk some Dame, talk some golf, anything that's on your mind here on the Rip City Drive on a Monday. I must say, before I get into my Dame Five Guys story, I feel like the weather doesn't really know what it wants to do today, because this morning I went and had to go do some errands early and got up, and when I was leaving the house about 9 a.m., I had a hoodie and sweats on, and I was like, okay, it was like 60 degrees, a little bit of a cool-ish vibe in the air. And then all of a sudden, like just an hour later, I'm like, okay, back to shorts and a t-shirt. And now it's still kind of like cloudy. So I think we got some humidity. It's a bit of a weird weather day today after we've had just a stretch of awesome weather, man. And I tell you, there's nothing better than Oregon summers. And I know Chad Doing definitely agrees with me on that one, as he's out golfing today. But there's it's unbeatable when you can get the ambiance that we have in Oregon, the beautiful, scenery, the mountains, the trees, all the greenery, and then you add in like 80 degrees. Oh, just perfect. Now, would it be green? Would it be that green if you were 80 degrees all the time? Absolutely not. But I'll take it for what I can get in the summer, and definitely but it's been nice, and enjoy the weather for as long as we have it, folks. Now, back to business. I teased you guys that I had an awesome Damian Lillard story, and I am here to deliver. So, back in the winter of 2016, a much younger Brendan was just getting his adult bearings in the world a couple years into my college career, and it was mid-December, right around the middle of the month, and I was back home in Sherwood for winter break of college. And naturally, like most college kids, you take advantage of every single opportunity available to make money during off-school time. And because I had worked this job the prior summer, they were more than happy to have me come back even just for a month. It was easy just to throw me back on the schedule, and bing, bang, boom, Brendan was rehired for the month. Anyhow, the job was working at Five Guys in Tualatin. Shout out, Five Guys Burgers and Fries, where I have some fond memories for a couple college summers and winters, making ends meet, so to speak. Shout out to my main man, West, for hooking me up with that job and being super flexible with my schedule back in the day when I was working some radio internships across town at a different station here in town. And, it was awesome to, work around that and be able to still make a little bit of money and, obviously be able to pay for the expensive thing that is higher education these days. But anyhow, me and my good buddy, Keenan Punkocher, longtime friend and college roommate at the time, who also worked at Five Guys that Christmas break as he was also home. We just so happened to be working together on that mid-December evening, and it was just me, Keenan, and our manager, John Fody. And it was just the three of us, pretty typical, middle of the week kind of a thing. I couldn't remember exactly what day, felt like a Tuesday, something like that, cold December day and, or evening, I should say, and you wouldn't think too much about it as being any more than just what it is. But ever since John, one of the managers there at Five Guys, found out how sports crazed Keenan and I were, he would always tell what we thought was a tall tale about the select few times that Damian Lillard had stopped by and grabbed a to-go order at the Five Guys in Tualatin. Naturally, again, just being 20 at the time, having an adult who's just happens to be saying kind of the perfect story. We're like, nah, man, you're yanking our chain. And we constantly teased him about it and, joked for, I believe he told us over summer and, never saw him over summer, of course. And we didn't pay any mind to it other than be like, yeah, sure, dude. Yeah, he came in here. Absolutely. However, on that cold December night, just as we're getting ready to close, so Five Guys, I believe it closed about 10:30 at the time, and we get a phone call placing a to-go order. It's, now mind you, John had mentioned in the past that whenever Dame would show up to Five Guys, he would call in his order. And sometimes it would be a female that called in for him. So considering the lateness, we thought, okay, maybe, but we really didn't think so. It was John who took the order, and he was like, nah, couldn't really give heads or tails whether or not he thought it was. So we go about doing our Five Guys work, making them patties fresh, frying the fries, doing our pre-closing duties as, just like anything else, you're working a long shift and you want to go home after smelling like fries and all that good stuff. So long story short, Keenan was in the back of the house doing dishes, I believe. Godspeed to you, Keenan. While John was at the grill and I was up on the POS system and ice cream. We're getting close to close, and I figure the next person in the door, because it's like, again, I think we closed at 11. I want to say it's like 10:50, maybe 10:55, something along that. And I'm like, okay, the next person that comes in, they're going to be our to-go order, because we hadn't had anybody for a minute. The to-go order is just about ready, and we're, trying to dial in our stuff and get ready to, close the restaurant, get ready for the next day. And, at that point, we're just like, okay, we'll see what happens. Then, out of nowhere, a really, and I mean really nice car pulled up. Can't recall, but Maserati, Bentley, something of that nature. And all of a sudden I was like, oh man. So in a very sly way, I slithered back to the kitchen and I told Keenan, yo, I think this is Dame, dude. And immediately I recognized it is Dame coming in. And in this moment, young Brendan, who was far less media trained than he is now, is kind of slightly freaking out. This, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like it is at the time, my favorite athlete and still up there, of course. And, Dame was a legit hero to me. And it's like he's walking around the L-shaped entrance. So I got about, 5-10 seconds as he's kind of casually walking up before I have to greet him. And he comes up, says he had a to-go order, and, that part goes off pretty casual. As I'm keeping it cool. It was tough, but I remember just keeping it cool, being like, to-go order, all that stuff. And Keenan and John kind of come into the front, just kind of casually hanging around. Nothing too crazy as Dame's just waiting for his food. We got, probably just a couple minutes before it's ready. And the boldest I got during this experience was shortly before we had Dame's food ready. I asked him for a selfie, and he happily obliged, and it just meant the world to young 20-year-old Brendan at the time. Like I said, going to Blazer games when Keenan and I in college was a treat. We absolutely loved when we could scrape together enough dollars to, drive up from Corvallis up to Moda Center and have that experience. And we watched a lot of Blazer games, and Keenan and I were as big of Dame fans as there were at the time. And for him to take a moment and, be like, absolutely, take a selfie. We talked Blazers for a few minutes, and the Blazers themselves in that particular season at that particular time were kind of having a tough year. And I know it couldn't have been, maybe the top of his want to when he's just going to pick up some food to, grab a selfie, talk about the Blazers for a few minutes. But it will always stand out to me how nice Dame was in that moment and how he was like, sure, absolutely, let's get a picture. And, he talked to our manager, John. He talked to Keenan. And, we were all just like, how the Blazers doing? They, we got to turn, kind of get things going. He's like, oh, yeah, man, we're going to turn things around. And, absolutely, they went on to, fight and make the playoffs that year. And it was just one of those, like, meeting your hero type moments when you're kind of young and professional athletes are kind of up there on a pedestal to you and all those things. And, we made sure that Dame was heavily hooked up. Like, don't get me wrong, folks. We made him a really good couple burgers and then gave him a boatload of fries. Anyone who's been to Five Guys knows the policy is not to fill the cup up with fries. The policy is to dump fries in your bag to where we have so many French fries in your bag that you're like, man, it's too many fries. That is the way it works. And he was off, and that was it. We gave him a go Blazers and, said same back, and that was it. And it turned out to be, a pretty quick interaction, probably whole thing, less than 10 minutes. He was pretty in and out, but I will never, forget just how, humble and just kind of like, I now know with hindsight in that kind of a situation, an athlete maybe doesn't want to be peppered with those kind of things. Again, you're 20 years old at the time. You're just a kid, and you're thinking a little bit differently. But now I appreciate it even more because Dame legit took that time to be nice, be conversational, and he had no obligation to do so. He was just coming to pick up his food at almost 11 o'clock at night. So, Yeah, that's essentially the Dame Five Guys story. And other than me and Keenan telling it to each other in references over the years, I can't say I've told too many people. It's kind of one of those stories that I just held on for a good time. And man, when I heard Dame was coming back to Portland, and I knew that I was going to be filling in for Chad here on the Rip City Drive, I knew I had to share this story. And easily for me, it was the most famous interaction I ever had working in food service. As I'm sure, like everyone, most likely everyone listening on this show remembers, there was a time in life when you're young and you're in food service, right? I mean, I've joked over the years. I've worked, at a chicken restaurant. I've worked at Sonic. I've worked at Five Guys. I've worked around, and I think that's what you got to do when you're young is cross off all that food service experience. But before this, and I can remember it also like it was yesterday, not to further age myself, but before Dame being food service coolest person who ever pulled in, I will say back in, oh goodness, this has got to be 2013, maybe 2014, but I think 2013. I was working at Sonic in Wilsonville, and just a car hop. And no, for all you who were asking the question, Brendan did not wear skates. Unfortunately, I'm not nearly coordinated enough to have been one of those awesome Sonic car hops on skates. Had some friends who were capable, but not Brendan. Brendan was just out there hustling left and right to get those those tip hustle points, so to speak, at Sonic. But very casually, one day there's an order, and I don't even really remember the exact details of it, but I think it might have been the drive-through. And maybe it was even the stalls. But that one of those summers that I was there at Sonic, there were a couple Blazers that had come through. And if memory serves, believe one day we saw DeLon Wright, Blazers legend DeLon Wright. Loved DeLon Wright when he was here for his year. And then the other time was when Mo Williams came to Sonic. And we can all remember Mo Williams being the backup point guard to Dame early in his career. And I remember Mo Williams coming into Sonic, and it was one of those things where, again, you're talking a bunch of 16, 17, 18-year-old kids, right? Like, it's when you see opulent wealth, you're kind of like, ooh, ah. And I can distinctively remember Mo Williams had one of the nicest all-red Bentleys that it was so clean. Just all red, brand new Bentley. And I remember rolling out there, hooking him up with, I think it was like a slush or, drink or something like that. And same kind of thing where back then I was like, oh, wow, Mo Williams. And I was even younger, not quite to the extent, but before Dame, that was easily like the most meeting a quote celebrity at a typical fast food job. And, I think this kind of relates to, and we'll talk about it a little bit later in the show, because I heard the story over the weekend at the British Open about Scotty Scheffler and Chipotle. And I don't know if any of you had heard this. If you haven't, we'll run through it real quick. Is during his media availability, Scotty Scheffler was talking about how he can't go to the Chipotle that's near the SMU campus where he lives in Dallas because too many people recognize him. It gets to be, a cluster. And we just talked earlier in the show how that is not Scotty Scheffler's jam. Like, he's probably not a guy who's going to be super comfortable if, several hundred golf fans just start descending on a Chipotle. But then he made the comment, he's like, oh, I've got a secret Chipotle in town. Nobody recognizes me there. And, I think, and he's like, I'm not going to tell anybody where that is. So that kind of, goes back to that hand-in-hand thing where I think it humanizes, I think, celebrities a little bit, brings them down to our level when it's like, for me at that moment when I was like, wow, I didn't know it at the time, but now an NBA 75 player who is, one of the best Blazers of all time, making all these millions of dollars, he comes to Five Guys and we'll just grab a Five Guys burger. Or Scotty Scheffler, the best golfer in the world, will just casually go into a relatively empty Chipotle because he's like, yeah, sweet, I can get in, get out, nobody sees me. And, that's where I go back again to, how cool it was that Dame was super chill because, to that exact point, I don't know if you ran into Scotty Scheffler at, Chipotle, if he'd be like, yeah, man, let's talk golf. Yeah, man, let's take a couple selfies and things. So, I think every athlete's different. I think every athlete's, interactions with the public are very different. And as he's coming back to Portland now, back to Dame, that's the kind of person that's coming back. The kind of dude who will, walk into, a fast food burger place and just, be chill and, be open to taking a selfie with a fan or talking, Blazers when they're not having the best season. And that wasn't a media session or anything that was required. Dame could have handled that any number of different ways. And to hear that guy is back in Portland, and we're going to get into it so much here on the show today, I still don't know if it's really hit me. And, save me all the negative things about fit or, how he'll, be a leader and all the real just kind of like nitpicky things from people who don't like this move. And the biggest one I see is, well, the Blazers can't pick a direction. They can't pick a direction. Save me that. For at least a while. And you think about what they're getting Dame on with this mid-level exception, guaranteed 3 years, roughly about $14 million a year. If Dame can come back and be, and again, this is probably not giving Dame full credit, if Dame can come back and be 80% of the player that he was pre-Achilles injury, 85%, $14 million a year is going to be a steal for Dame's services, even if it's a different role than we envisioned or than we remember, years ago when he was the de facto, king of the mountain. And I'm not saying he's not, because trust me, like I'm not surprised that, we'll see. You never know. Keith Wilson might show up at Moda Center tonight and give Dame a key to the city. I mean, that is how much this guy is loved. And I think, at certain points, there were people who thought, the Blazers weren't necessarily able to sign a marquee free agent, so they go out and sign Dame, even though he's not going to be available this year because he's going to be would have been a marquee free agent the following year. And, we'll get into, maybe some of the things that don't fit exactly like a glove, but I'll tell you what, for fans of this franchise who recently have had to deal with the potential cloud of a sale and all the things that can go along with a franchise being sold. A couple years of pretty tough play on the court. And then, some tanking years, some retooling years, needing to make the trades to get back to a level of, cap responsibility. And for the Blazers to be able to do all that and then bring back Dame, sure. Is it a finished product? Absolutely not. Do I think the Blazers are going to, go win the Western Conference anytime soon? I think they need work. This is far from a finished product, and I think there are guys who need to take steps and guys who need to develop and all these things. But for the moment, it's a feel-good story, and you can't knock it for it being a feel-good story. It reinvigorates the fan base, adds a little bit of juice, and when you add in bringing back Dame with young Hansen and what that's brought to the franchise in just a short amount of time, the positivity around the Blazers, while maybe a little rose-colored glasses with expectations with Dame being back, I appreciate that they're being put out into the ethos again because it means the Blazers are at least in a better place than they were maybe when they traded Dame. So let's at least start with that and work from that. We'll take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be getting into a little bit more of the audio from the Open. I want to hear more from Scotty Scheffler and company and a few more things as he continues to dominate the golf world. And then top of the hour, we'll get you ready for our conversation with the Godfather, Dwight James, who'll be in studio. And we'll have David Coleman a little bit later in the show to break down the Open itself. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Monday. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive, final segment of hour number one. We got a little bit of breaking news we want to go ahead and talk on here shortly, and that is Portland Trailblazers. Not only are we having a press conference for Dame Dolla back in Portland tonight, the Blazers have released their 25-26 preseason schedule. The four-game slate from October 8th through the 16th will feature matchups against the Golden State Warriors twice, once at home, first on the road, then at home. The Sacramento Kings at home, and the Utah Jazz on the road. So, again, NBA preseason is what it is, NBA preseason. But just to know, folks, October 8th will be the next time you get to see your Portland Trailblazers in action, which, to be honest with you, it's going to be here quicker than you think, considering that we've got, fall camps for football starting sometime next week across, college football. We're going to be into college football season before you blink. We're going to be into NBA season before you blink, and I got to take a breath because I'm still trying to enjoy summer, folks. And as I start getting ready for the next season and everything else, talking about Blazers expectations and the excitement just of having a new team, slightly different tweaks, Dame back and, obviously off the court mentor role in this first year as he recovers from the injury. But it's going to be awesome. And I tell you what, Moda Center is going to be quite loud whenever Mark Mason introduces Damian Lillard again. We said we were going to hear from Scotty Scheffler following his Open win, and we will deliver on that promise here. Let's go ahead and hear first Scotty, or as it was announced, Scotty winning the British Open.
And Scotty Scheffler has his Open Championship and the third leg of golf's Grand Slam.
Scotty, again, not really a whole lot of drama because there wasn't a whole lot of drama. Scotty won by 4 strokes, and he talked about, first, the fan support that he's received.
I don't really know exactly what to say, but thank you so much to the fans this week for all the support. I know I wasn't the fan favorite today, but I did hear a lot of USA and Dallas, Texas chants, and so I appreciate you guys coming out to support.
It's funny just the self-awareness of Scotty Scheffler to even know that he's necessarily, not everybody's favorite golfer because he's probably crushing your favorite golfer on his way if he's not, which, again, just that very unassuming nature of Scotty Scheffler. He also talked about how just a great week that it was over there on the other side of the pond.
Overall, it's been a great week. The fan support all week was tremendous. It was a ton of fun to get to play here. I got to play with Shane the first couple of days, and you guys coming out and supporting Shane the way you did was really special, and it was a really fun week to be able to play in front of such a great crowd. To my family, starting with my wife and my son, thank you so much for the support. I couldn't do any of this without you, and I just love you very much, and I can't wait to get home and celebrate.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. The pictures and just the image of Scotty Scheffler's young son out there was just, I'm not going to lie. It was a very cute scene in one of those moments where you're just like, that's cool. And the Ryder Cup, the claret jug and just everything else that went along with it. Super, super cool. Scotty had a couple more comments. He talked about how he put together great shots this week, and that's what led him to the claret jug.
I felt like I've been putting it really nice all year. I've done, I've had a lot of really solid starts, and I was kind of waiting for a week in which the hole would start looking pretty big. And at times this week, I was holding a lot of putts. I'd hold some really important putts on the front nine today, some really nice par putts, and putter was definitely a weapon this week.
That was Scotty, talking about his putting. This was Scotty talking about executing his shots this last weekend.
Good experience. Winning major championships is always really difficult, and I knew today was going to be another challenging day, and I just did my best to go out there and try and execute shots. And fortunately today I got to a better start than I did at the PGA, and was able to give myself some space and kind of hold on to that lead for most of the day.
Just casual Scotty Scheffler, give myself some space and hold on to it, right? It's one of those things where the Open is unique, right, in the sense that link style, it's different. The weather, the hazards, it can be frustrating. And we saw, some golfers, obviously have some frustrating moments. And yet the way that Scotty Scheffler is even able to, dominate a link style course that he definitely is probably not one of the if it's a PGA Tour or, the Masters courses he plays often, I think that's one of those things that makes it probably easier for him as he kind of mentally figures out how he's going to dominate, right? And you go over to the links courses and the I believe 2 or 3 that they rotate from. It's not easy, and I've always been particularly impressed with those golfers who are able to play the links courses as well as typical courses. And Scotty Scheffler. Like I said, we'll be talking about him a little bit more and a little bit later in the program when we catch up with PGA Dave in hour number 3. But dare I say, like almost kind of in the same way that like people made that comment, like, are we sure Tom Brady's human? Are we sure Tom Brady's an alien? I would say the same thing. Well, I was a little young for it, but I'd say the same thing about Michael Jordan at times, right? And it's like Scotty Scheffler is kind of like that. I mean, he's not your typical superstar. And I think it's just something that continues to need to be examined and looked at, because you just don't see superstars who are like, and I'm saying I love it, but just a superstar who is like, like golf is like my third most important thing in my life. And I would kind of venture to say, and I go back to my last comparison just as we close out the first hour here, Nikola Jokic is probably in a similar boat where I don't know if basketball is like his first and top love in this world. He's got other things, but yet he is the best basketball player in the world, pound for pound, in my opinion. So I think there's a lot of definitely similarities between Scotty Scheffler and Nikola Jokic. And shout out Jordan Spieth for making that comparison, because I think it's pretty spot on. So nevertheless, we'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. We'll be back with the top of the hour, be getting you guys ready for the Godfather, Dwight James, who's going to be joining us at 4:20. Top of the hour, we're going to share a weekend story that I had this last weekend. Couple awesome experiences. Keep it locked here on the Rip City Drive on a Monday. What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here for the Rip City Drive. Scotty Scheffler is the winner of the British Open and the iconic Claret Jug after casually dominating the field this weekend. Scheffler finished minus 17 under par and took the jug by 4 strokes over second place Harris English. NBA veteran Chris Paul has signed a 1-year deal with the Clippers in his 21st and expected final season in the NBA, and Damian Lillard's return to Portland press conference will get underway at 6 p.m. Stay tuned to Rip City Radio 620 for live coverage. Coming up on the big show, we're going to have Portland sports godfather Dwight James here in studio in hour number 2. Then hour number 3, we'll be catching up with PGA David Coleman to talk a little Open. You've got the Rip City Drive here on a Monday. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Monday afternoon. Hope everyone's having a great afternoon so far, whether you're going to work, coming from work, getting done with work, working out at the gym, listen to us on the iHeartRadio app. We appreciate you. You can also catch us live on the Rip City Radio YouTube. Join the chat there. 620 Rip City Radio is where you can find us on YouTube, chat, or you can give us a phone call, 503-248-0620. Again, 503-248-0620. We'll be catching up with the Godfather Dwight James in studio here in about 20 minutes. But until then, definitely got to share some interesting, an interesting weekend that I had. And then most importantly, following up on a conversation I had last time I hosted. So for those of you who know or don't know or were listening last time I was on, one of my favorite things to do here in Oregon is go river floating in the summer. And it dare I say, for some people, it's the golf course. It's, being out, in nature. For me, floating is my happy place. When I can get in an inner tube, ice cold beverage and float down the river, that is my idea of, perfect fun. And, naturally, living here in the great state of Oregon, those opportunities are weather limited, and you only get a brief window to do that this summer. So, or any summer, I should say. So this last weekend, or this last couple days, took heavy advantage. Went out Thursday, did the first float of the year on Thursday, and crushed it. It was awesome. Good to be back out there, and it was really good to go out there in the middle of the week as I had an off day and was able to go when it was really not that crowded, but still like 85, 86 degrees. Brought my dog with me. Zoe was a awesome trooper, hanging out in her little cooler float and floating with us. But before I finish the end game of the weekend, last time I was on with you guys, I talked about how there was a bill that had been signed into law, House Bill 2982, which kind of took aim, at least from the way I and many others early on had interpreted it, as an issue for potential tubers out there. So, again, to clarify for those, that bill is going to go into effect in January, and it basically just expands the need for waterway access permits. Just like you needed, a boat permit to be able to drive a boat, there was some expansion in wanting to get waterway access permits for kayaks, paddleboards, things of that nature. Now, originally, from what I had heard from this, inner tubes, and including inner tubes that were tied together, were going to, fall under this new jurisdiction, and that's how it would apply. However, and, you would face a fine if you didn't. This was all something that's going to come on next summer. However, I talked to you guys, I want to say the 8th or 9th of July, and then just a few days ago last week, on July 15th, the state agency clarified and said that inner tubes would not be required per this permit. And looked this up, again, from the Statesman Journal, and they had a quote from an OSMB spokeswoman who said, the definition it's technically all those things, but they said, the interpretation for enforcement purposes for safety equipment is that the waterway access permit requirements does not include single tubes or single inner tubes tied together. So long story short, TBD if you're still in the paddleboard and kayak and canoe game, as it doesn't look like anything changed there, as that's going to, still require a waterway access permit. But if you're an inner tuber, sounds like we are in the clear, folks. And honestly, I don't think it was, intentional or anything. I think they just clarified. And I think it was fascinating because I had started to see some general hubbub come up in the days since that law had kind of been out. People had started talking about, paddleboards, kayaks, tubes. And there was actually, I believe at Detroit Lake, somebody got a Facebook group event going that was going to be like a float protest out at like Detroit Lake, and had, hundreds of people signed up. And say what you will, I mean, I think as I talked about it, I see both sides of why they're trying to raise money. And I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to realize why maybe the state of Oregon is looking to fill in the gaps a little bit. 1 + 1 = 2, and you want to keep things solvent, and they want to, be able to control the invasive species. And that's where this money is earmarked for and all those things. But nevertheless, I was thrilled to find out that inner tubes will not be applied. And just like that, Brendan is back to his happy place of floating. So, again, got to shout out this last weekend because, man, it was awesome down there. Like I said, I got out Thursday and then got out Saturday as well. And, man, the weather was awesome. The river water this time of year, is I go floating in the Clackamas River, and it is perfect. You're talking 75 degrees by the time you get to about midday, which for that river, how shallow it is, and it's a very, it's a very casual float. This is, for those of you who might be thinking I'm whitewater rafting, not so much. It's a very casual float. It's a very nice way to have a lot of fun and still have, a little bit of adventure, because it's not a lazy river. You can't just, ignore, around that you have nature and hazards and sticks and rocks and all that nature. But it's one of those things where I'm just reminded every summer I get back out there for the first couple of times just how beautiful of a state we have here in Oregon. And when I'm sitting there floating down the Clackamas River, and I've got, Mount Hood behind me, and you've got just green trees, and you just look like you're floating almost through like a forest in some sense, because a bunch of that river doesn't have houses on it. Some parts of it do, but others, it just looks like you're going on a nature trail. And that's what I say is, like, we may have to pay for it in Oregon. And again, I'm not someone who loves rain. I'm not someone that loves cold. I think if you like rain, you're definitely a special breed, and I respect it. That's not me. So I am, we pay the price for about 7 to 8 months with pretty mediocre weather, in my opinion, so we can have these fantastic summers where it is so green, so beautiful, and warm. And yeah, like I said, 8-9 months out of the year, yeah, I think Oregon can be a little up for debate weather-wise. Sure, it's not the Midwest. We're not getting banks of snow, so that's obviously a win. But at the same token, we only get about 2.5, 3 months at best of really, really good sunny weather like this. So very much like my boss Chad Doing has said, taking advantage and golfing all the time. You got to take advantage and do what you can outside, because, man, I can't tell you how many times I'm sitting there and have an off day in, December or January, and I'm like, man, in another world, in another place, I'd be floating right now. And, that's one of the things that appeals to me long term about, potentially living in a warmer climate is like, I went and visited my buddy in Texas a couple years ago now, and went down there in just mid-April, and it was absolutely astounding weather. And obviously in the summer you're getting real heat in Texas, but I definitely am eyeing a climate that's got a little bit more number of months that are pretty nice. But all jokes aside, man, take advantage of it. Get out, enjoy the Oregon weather while you can, because it is just perfect out there. And I will say this too is maybe I'm digging myself a little bit of a hole here, folks, because I've been talking about how much I enjoy floating on the Clackamas River, and have for about, let's see, how long have I worked at this radio station? 5-6 years. And I swear, every single year, that float gets more and more crowded. So maybe it's something I need to keep to myself. But man, I tell you what, it's a great time, and I know why it's busy because it's relatively cheap entertainment. Costs the cost of buying your parking pass and having said infrastructure, and off you go. And I hope to get down a few more times, but was definitely trying to crank up the opportunities this last week, and I'm definitely going to be getting out there Saturday or Sunday this week. Because that's the other shoe that's going to drop, folks. For me personally, I would love to have the entire month of August to be able to float as well. But for those of you who don't know, fall camp is on the horizon. And while I am here at Rip City Radio currently, when I'm not at Rip City Radio, I'm running BeaversEdge.com, the best Oregon State site out there on 3 affiliate, BeaversEdge.com. Make sure to check it out as we're getting ready for fall camp season, folks. Those Beaver fans out there who want the latest and greatest from Oregon State fall camp, how the quarterbacks are looking, how everything is checking out as fall camp's going to start just over a week from now. I've heard that their first day is going to be a week from Wednesday. So stay tuned, folks. That's going to be some exciting moments. And I'm real excited to be able to get back down to Oregon State fall camp tomorrow. During tomorrow's show, actually just about this time, we're going to do a more in-depth breakdown on Oregon State football. Continue my conversation I had about a month ago, just kind of looking at Oregon State, going by the schedule, because I think, legitimately, this is going to be a nice opportunity for a bounce-back season for Oregon State. I haven't minced words. I don't think Oregon State was a very good football team last season. Just putting it bluntly. And they won 5 games. They went 5-7 and beat a ranked team. So the fact that they have taken meaningful steps to address those issues, replace some of those guys with more proven commodities, has me real excited. And I think, for Oregon State, the opportunity to get back to a bowl game is obviously big. And I'm not saying I expect them to push for the college football playoff, but if you're asking me if I could see a world where they get 8, 9, maybe even inch to 10 wins with like a bowl game, it's possible. Right now, the only major landmines you see on their schedule is, Oregon and Texas Tech. Beyond those two teams, there's not really an opponent that's like unbeatable. At the same token, the schedule is very middle heavy, where it's like while there might not be a lot of landmines, there are a lot of teams who are very much on your level, and it's going to be more of a pick'em type situation in game. So we'll talk a little bit more about Oregon State tomorrow. But again, tubers rejoice across the state of Oregon, because you will not have to apply for a Oregon Waterway Access Permit to float next year. So again, score one for the little guys back home, man. Got to take your wins where you can get them, right? All right, we'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be joined in studio by the Godfather, Dwight James. Dwight was nice enough to give us a few minutes of his time before heading down to Mona Center for the Damian Lillard press conference. Excited to get his thoughts on Dame back and really Summer League, a whole bunch of other things as well. So go ahead and take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Dwight James, the Godfather. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Monday afternoon. Pleased to have in studio the Godfather, Dwight James, joining me before heading further north to catch the Damian Lillard press conference. Godfather, I feel like it's been forever since I've seen you in person. It's good to see you. And how's the summer been treating you so far?
It's been great, Brendan. I've had a great summer. Weather's been nice. Had a few trips out to the golf course and, just enjoying it, sitting out on the back deck, enjoying warm evenings. And gosh, you guys haven't done anything to the decor here since I left. Same stuff hanging on the walls. Come on, we got to do something here, don't we?
I mean, in all fairness, Dwight, if I was in this room a little bit more, I mean, I think you got to talk to Chad and Burkhart. They spend a little bit more time in here than I do. But hey, if I'm going to start being in here more, we can add maybe. I mean, me personally, I'd like to see a few more Oregon State things in here. But no, it's good to hear. And I was just saying last segment, Dwight, to your point about sitting on the back patio. Oregon summers are just unbeatable, aren't they?
They're very nice. Yeah. And I'm one of the few that would like it a little warmer.
Oh, me too.
I love the hot weather.
Yep.
And I get a lot of static about that. But I love the hot weather. It can't get too hot for me, actually. And I have access to a pool just half mile away.
Nice.
And, let's go with 98 to 100. That's good for me.
Oh, it's perfect. And, I honestly think, Dwight, with what we have to – I'm not a big rain fan, so it's like when it's rainy and cold and gloomy, it's like, yeah, we should get a certain number of like 90-plus days in the summer, and that's how you enjoy it, and that's why I said it's awesome. And to your point, being able just to sit back, relax, and enjoy, not a humid heat or anything like that, just awesome heat is great. And again, want to dive in and catch up on a few things with you before you got to head back up to Moda Center. Let's just start with the Damian Lillard reunion. We'd heard some rumors, like when Milwaukee had released him. I think it was Chris Haynes had mentioned some teams, and it was like and Portland kind of a situation. But myself, Dwight, I didn't see this coming. Did you see any world where this Damian Lillard reunion would happen?
No, actually, I did not. I mean, I always thought he would end up here.
Sure.
I just didn't think it would happen this quickly. And quickly means I didn't think it would happen that soon after he became a free agent, so to speak. So, yeah, I was shocked. And I think his children had a lot to do with this. I think for that part of this, he's going to get to rehab with them around for a full year. And then he's got the one guaranteed year after that. And then he's got a player option for the third year of the contract, so he can evacuate if he wants or stay here. It's going to be an interesting thing to see how it works out. I've also been absolutely flabbergasted at the reaction of the public. I knew people would be really happy to have him back.
Sure.
I did not expect them to go off the cliff over it. People are talking championship. They're talking about how great this team is going to be. And I think there's great hope that Dame will, sort of transition this team into a contender.
Right. I mean, I definitely agree with you in the sense that, like, it seemed like we went from, dare I say, outhouse to penthouse almost overnight, right? That kind of mentality. And I think you also have to call a spade and look at the situation. And I think we'll just have to see, Dwight, like where Dame is in a year. I don't want to, make any declarations about his health, but let's just come back to Portland. Like, for instance, is he going to have a Kevin Durant-like recovery, or is it a Rodney Hood type recovery? And we all loved Rodney Hood in Portland. He was never the same player after that. And I'm not saying put any limits on anything and all those, the medical part of it, but, we kind of got to wait a year to see what the real on-court ramifications will be.
Yeah, I believe that's true. And I think as hard as he'll work to rehab, and by the way, I want to say at the outset, I'm happy for him he's back, and I'm happy for the fans who've had to suffer the last 4 or 5 years through teams that, didn't have a sniff of the playoffs. So I'm happy for all those people. But looking ahead, which in this case is hard to do because we have no idea how his rehab is going to go. He could have a very successful, quick sort of, I don't know, really. Yeah, I guess you could say Kevin Durant. I was going to say Aaron Rodgers rehab and get back out and play. But it could also go the other way. And oftentimes the player doesn't have control over that. it's a medical thing that no matter how hard you rehab, it just doesn't work, and I think it's harder for perimeter players, particularly at the defensive end, to get that sort of quickness back and the lateral movement back. So we'll see. But again, I'm happy for the player and the fans because and really the front office, what a genius move. Right on top of drafting a player from China, which is a windfall for the Blazers, and then also to bring Damian back. And I think there's people now buying season tickets for the coming year just to watch Damian on the sidelines in street clothes, which is amazing.
I mean, I think you had a tweet around the time it happened, Dwight, where you're like, people working the season ticket office are going to be just thrilled to be able to have, some ammunition, so to speak, to be able to sell season tickets. And I think this year and this offseason was maybe a little better than some of the previous ones that we've seen. But, dare I say, like obviously this year's out. We know Dame, was bought out by the Bucks, stretched and waived. When I saw that and then I saw him coming back here to Portland, Dwight, dare I say, like, if Dame comes back and is, let's just say, for sake of argument, 80% of the player he was, 85%, just purely an argument, there is a potential where I instantly thought of the David Justice situation in Moneyball where Brad Pitt's like, no, the Yankees are paying half your salary. That's what they think of you, paying this much to play against them. Yeah. And it's like, Dame's going to be on the Bucks contract on their books for a long time.
Yeah, he is. And again, I worry about that because it's unfair to Damian Lillard to expect him to return and be the same player he was 4 years ago. That's just not right. I mean, you can't expect that. It's going to be difficult. He's going to be older. The older you get, the harder that rehab becomes. He's got, and then the system being played here now, Chauncey Billups installed a defense-first system with running a lot off turnovers, a system that wasn't even attempted when Dame was here earlier. And so he would have to fit that system, you would think. What role he would have, especially if the two guards they have that are coming back, plus, the other guard they traded for, Drew Holiday, if they're all here, what role is Damian Lillard going to have? I don't know.
Catching up with the Godfather, Dwight James, here on the Rip City Drive. I think it's a good point, Dwight, and it's almost kind of like we were saying, you're kind of kicking the can down the road. Like, I saw so many people are like, how should Scoot Henderson feel about this, right? And really, as I kind of look at the rotation, I'm not sure it's really a problem until next basketball season because you pretty much swapped out Anthony Simons for Jrue Holiday. The guard rotation with Dame on the sideline, as we expect, it's almost a next year problem.
It is, except I'm now curious, and I'll ask you, what's that rotation going to be like with Jrue Holiday here? Are they bringing him in at that salary, a veteran, all-star, all-defensive player? Are they bringing him in to come off the bench, or is he going to take Scoot Henderson's job?
Immediately, in the immediate term, I think I could see both. let me put it this way, Dwight, there's a decent chance that Jeremy Grant, a $30-some million player, could come off the bench this year with having too money.
I think he will.
Right.
Yeah.
So if the Blazers don't mind that and can figure out a way to sell that, hey, you're going to be making a good chunk of money, but, you're coming off the bench. If they want to compete, I think Jrue Holiday would probably start. There are probably some instances where because of Jrue's defense, you could maybe run a lineup with, Jrue and Scoot or Jrue and Shaedon Sharpe and not, have too much. But then, to your point, the next year when you add Dame into that mix, it's almost like maybe there's one too many guys, or maybe just, we saw them. They traded away Simons because he wasn't going to fit that defensive system you just talked about.
Yeah, and the thing I see, too, that I was really, before the deals made and everything, I was looking forward to a season where we would finally, hopefully, find out about Scoot Henderson. Is he going to be that starting guard he was drafted to be?
Right.
Is he going to be that? Because I don't think we know yet. I don't think, even after all this time, we know too much about Shaedon Sharpe. How consistent can he be? Is he going to be the guy that can average in the 20s consistently? Right. Or is he going to be the up and down guy who's had trouble at times making threes? It's really difficult to know. And I was hoping this season would be about answering those questions, and then the following year because these guys are extension ready.
Right.
You know, they will be after next season for sure. So those, I don't know that those questions are going to be answered.
Yeah, Shaedon Sharpe's a curious one because I agree with you, Dwight. If the Blazers felt like Shaedon Sharpe was going to be the next coming, they would have paid him right now. Like,
Yeah, I would agree.
I think anyway. And I think there's definitely an okay with letting him enter restricted free agency and kind of have it be a prove-it year this year. I mean, worst case scenario, he does pop and becomes an all-star. You retain his restricted rights. And maybe if he doesn't, like, if Shaedon Sharpe doesn't pop this year, Dwight, will he ever, is the question.
Yeah. No, he's had time now,
Right.
You know, and we've been able to say, well, look, he didn't play that year in college.
Sure.
And whatever, he's a Canadian, so he probably didn't get great competition in high school, on and on and on. You can say all these things, but at a certain point, you sort of have to establish your identity in the league as a player.
Right.
Who are you going to be? And I'm not sure he has done that yet. There's all the athleticism. We've all seen the dunks and all the other stuff, but you want to see the basketball player.
Right. And even just consistently using that athleticism to score at will, which, you know,
or to defend.
Right.
Yeah.
And exactly. And you go back to when Chauncey sat him down for a period last year. And I don't think it was one of those things that was maybe given enough credit because, simply put, you know, they got too far down the road for Terry Stotts to ever have those conversations with Dame and CJ.
Yeah.
They had done business a certain type of way for so long, and then, you know, you kind of see on the other end. And, you know, I think that's one of the things the Blazers are really anchoring on is that, you know, top 10 defensive rating during that stretch. And I guess for me, Dwight, is there I choose to look at it from the glass half full perspective as well, but is there a possibility that maybe we're reading too much into a small sample size from last year?
Oh, it's very possible. Very possible. And you have to remember, too, that team last year, I think people knew from day one it was going to be a lottery team. And I think their opponents all knew that. Do you think they spend time preparing for lottery teams like they do spending for teams that are going to be playoff rivals? I do not think they do. I've never seen that they do. I think they jumped a lot of teams by surprise.
Sure.
They ambushed some teams during that run that just weren't prepared for what they were doing. Now, too, and Chauncey talked about this during Summer League, more and more teams are kind of playing that way. You saw Indy playing that way in the playoffs. So the more teams that play that way, the better prepared the offenses will be for that sort of pressure defense.
And when you're looking at what they saw from that sample size, because I remember, you know, that stretch too, Dwight, and there was a possibility there was a chance when they could have made the play-in. They were within grasp at one point of being in that, you know, 10th range with Sacramento and whatnot. And I remember it well. There was a stretch where, you know, you played Boston on the road, Cleveland on the big dogs, right? And why they had been playing better came up just a little bit short against those really good teams. And as I look at it now, I think TBD still on what Young Hansen can do. I think it's awesome what we've seen, but I don't think you can take Summer League for too much going into the NBA season. And what kind of player is Jrue Holiday going to be? What are your thoughts on Jrue as well?
Well, from what, you know, talking to other people around the league, they tell me that, well, first of all, he's the greatest teammate in the league. I mean, he's a great guy in the community. The fans are going to love him. His teammates are going to love him.
Yes.
I think he might have slowed a little bit defensively.
Sure.
Still a reliable offensive player. Reliable in a sense he will do the right thing. He'll get the ball to the right people at the right times. Very smart player. Very selfless player. Doesn't need to get his points, but can get them when he needs them. I think he'll be fine. But, you know, the age is a factor.
It is.
And Father Time is undefeated. You just, you know, it's really hard to maintain a certain level at both ends of the court when you get into your late 30s or even mid-30s. So it remains to be seen. And I like him as a player, always have. Yeah. He's a good, honest player. And I remember what he did in New Orleans to the Trailblazers in the playoffs that year. And it was sensational.
Yeah, I mean, to your credit, Dwight, that's probably what a lot of fans are thinking. They're like, oh, this is the same Jrue Holiday that with Anthony Davis and Rajon Rondo and Nikola Mirotic just ran circles around the Blazers that playoff series, and still gives me a little bit of a goosebump shake, Dwight. Oh man, that was a tough one. But going back to like in terms of his game, I think I agree with you. And is it still one of those things where maybe Drew Holiday at 80% of the defender he was? Compare that to Simons, the guy he replaced.
Oh, he's gonna at his worst he'll be better than Ant was. And no offense to Anthony Simons, I love the guy. He was great in the community. Did so many things without a lot of attention coming to it, and a terrific offensive player. But I don't think he got there defensively like they had hoped. But you're going to see Holiday still be maybe not the big time stopper that he was at one time, but perimeter defense is a tough task. He'll give it everything he's got, and I think that's going to be very good for this team. What worries me, too, is their best defender is Kamara.
Right.
And I think playing all the different people that he has to guard, they use him on centers and point guards. They use him on everybody. I hope he can stay healthy and play a lot of games. I hope he kicks his offensive game up another level. But I think when I look at the team as it stands now, the other concern I would have with the team is a lack of depth, and that can hurt. You know, you look back at the last few years, a lot of players on this team have had injury problems.
Right.
They've sat out games. Now, some of that, I'm sure, was just to help ensure the tanking.
Right.
And they might have been in a situation where if they would have needed them, they would have played. But still in all, to get anywhere over the long term in the league, you've got to have enough players.
Yeah, I mean, just live with me in this best case scenario world, Dwight. I mean, in terms of like Joe Cronin's dream, is it like Drew Holiday doing for the Blazers what Chris Paul did for the Thunder when the Rockets traded him away? In a pure like best case scenario.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a really good comparison, actually, Brendan. What I would say is, this whole idea of players mentoring other players, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Sure.
Sometimes the mentor doesn't want to do it, or he sees something in the one he's supposed to mentor, and it leads him to believe that guy's not going to listen anyway, so why, whatever. Or it's the one who's supposed to be mentoring say, hey, I play my way. I'm not really interested in what this guy does. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And, the hope would be that he can work with Scoot Henderson and make him a better point guard. Now, I think to do that, the most important work is by Scoot Henderson.
Right.
He's got to get to be a better shooter, make better judgment on when to pass, when not to pass, cut the turnovers down, which is related to the passing part. He's just got to be better. And I thought at the end of the year last year, he was playing well.
Right.
And I'd like to have seen him be able to continue that this season. But even if he starts, he's going to have the shadow over his shoulder from Drew Holiday.
Right.
And that's a problem for a young player. And I would worry about that a little bit.
For sure. Just a couple more things before we let you go. Dwight, know you got to head up north. But last thing is, as you kind of look at the roster, you mentioned depth for the upcoming season. Is it, dare I say, a bold move, Cotton, to give the full mid-level exception to someone who will not contribute this year? Again, I love having Dame back, and I think it's awesome for the franchise. But to your point about depth, not like we saw them chase any free agents particularly,
Yeah. It is a bold move. It very much is.
Yeah.
They're giving a contract to the guy who left because they drafted Scoot Henderson, and now Scoot Henderson is here, and he's supposed to help him or take his job, one or the other. And knowing Dame, I mean, he's not going to have any problem helping out.
Sure.
You won't see bad attitude from Damian Lillard. That's not the point. But still in all, he's in a tough spot. I think Chauncey Billups is in a real tough spot because I'm not sure how this whole thing is going to work out. And he's the one inevitably that has to make the decisions on who plays, who doesn't play, how many minutes, et cetera.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. Like I said, it's the Dame part of the equation waits a whole year. But to Dwight's point, Drew Holiday, Scoot Henderson, how's that going to shake out? And it's going to be fascinating. Dwight, I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining me in studio in person. I'll let you run so you can avoid, well, maybe not avoid, but just fight through Portland traffic on your way up to Moda. Dwight, you're the man.
Oh, thanks, Brendan. It's a pleasure to come back to the studio again and see the great Mike Shacker in the other room. one of my all-timers. I love Mike, and good to see you two in person again, Brendan.
Absolutely. Again, the Godfather, Dwight James, definitely can catch him at Dwight James' Substack, as he'll have coverage of Portland's press conference with Damian Lillard tonight. Make sure to stay tuned to Rip City Radio as well. We'll be right back here on the Rip City Drive. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Monday afternoon, getting you guys ready for the Damian Lillard press conference that starts at 6 o'clock here live during Trailblazers Courtside. We'll be carrying that here on Rip City Radio. Just got done with the Godfather in studio. Man, it was good to catch up with Dwight James. I hadn't seen him in person in a while. It's great to catch up with the Godfather. Love his takes on, Dame, Jrue Holiday. I see a lot of the same things. I think it's really easy to kind of get super, super excited and think back to those awesome memories of Dame and then realize, like Dwight said, he's going to be a slightly different player, all these things. But nevertheless, I'm thrilled. I'm still really excited for what it means for the franchise. I think maybe getting a little ahead on our skis with expectations and that sort of thing. But I do like that there's some intriguing pieces to this roster. And like I said, in my head, I'm just going with it until it doesn't happen. Best case scenario, Jrue Holiday is what Chris Paul did for that young OKC core. So, again, we'll just roll with that until it doesn't work. But, again, appreciate everyone tuning in. 503-248-0620 is the phone number. Shout out our YouTube chat. Lots of people in the chat today. Got Pete, Rachel, all chiming in. Donovan as well. Colby Jack. Shout out to everyone on the YouTube chat for keeping the conversation going as well. You can find that at Rip City Radio 620 YouTube. Or, again, give us a call, 503-248-0620. Just wrapping up hour number 2. We're going to get back into a little bit of audio at the top of the hour. But, again, just talking the Portland Trailblazers, if we get you ready, just kind of following up with what we said with Dwight. I think there were a lot of really good points there. I think one thing that hasn't been talked about that I think is kind of, you have to take the good with the bad, right? And I will sit here and sing every Damian Lillard positive that there is. But I think at the same token, you do have to look at the other side of the coin. And like Dwight said, it is a bit of a bold move to give the full mid-level exception this year to a guy who will not be able to play. And when you consider, Portland's, Dwight mentioned the depth situation, I don't know if it's enough for me to be uber concerned, but like Dwight said, guys that get injured, things of that nature. So, Portland is definitely, in the way that I saw this when the deal kind of came together, is this was this year like the, hey, Dame, this is, you've done so much for us. Come back, rehab. We'll get, you're going to get the mid-level exception, even though we do not expect you to play. Following that, if Dame returns to the player that I think he can be, and again, it really comes down to his recovery. And like Dwight said, a lot of it's the body, human healing, all these things. But we've seen it both ways. We've seen a fan favorite role player in Rodney Hood. I mean, I don't know if there's been a role player that I was more. I loved Rodney Hood, and when he popped his Achilles against the Lakers in that game, I was there for that matchup. I was like, oh, maybe same kind of thing. Rodney Hood will be able to come back and all these things. And unfortunately, he was never quite the same player that he was. And I think, who you are before versus who you are after, how you attack rehab is obviously a big part of it. But there's a big sliding scale. If Dame is like Kevin Durant, and for all due respect, you really can't even tell that Kevin Durant tore his Achilles a few years ago. That's unbelievably rare. But if you could get that and Dame comes back to 85, 90% of the player he was, shoot, at $14 million a year, I'm not even going to say, maybe Dame starts or doesn't start down the line. Who knows, right? I don't even want to necessarily put that cart before the horse. But in theory, for what you could get from Damian Lillard out of $14 million a year, if he gets back healthy, that's where the bold move could pay off. So I'm very curious to kind of hear what Dame and Joe Cronin and company have to say as well. And hearing from Dwight, that obviously learning that Dame coming home for his family was a huge part of the equation as well. It just sounds like Dame wanted to be back here. He wanted to be with his family, and I'm sure he'll get asked questions about why he didn't maybe take other offers on the table. We know Boston was one. Jason Tatum was like, hey, let's rehab our Achilles together. Not a funny joke, but, nevertheless, Boston was after him. I think we'd heard Houston. We've heard the Lakers, had minimum contract offers, but I don't think anybody in the NBA, at least immediately that I've been able to see, was going to give Dame the same kind of contract that the Blazers did. And then when you throw in the real kind of respect that a no-trade clause gives you, I think that's even more just kind of shows Dame is here for the long haul. Maybe the grass wasn't quite greener on Milwaukee. We've obviously seen some things come out that he wasn't maybe thrilled to go to Milwaukee, but that's part of the business. And now is happy to come back and be with his family. And I made the joke, Portland winters aren't awesome. I'll tell you one thing, folks. Portland winter is like Cabo compared to a Milwaukee winter and the kind of wind chills and snowbanks you got to deal with there. So maybe Dame's like, just go back to Portland, man. Got my family there. Can make a nice little bit of coin. Can have, the fan base back behind me again. The team, it's a little rose-colored glasses, but I can squint and see the makings of a stronger team than, like when Dame arrives, like a solid, complementary built team when he arrives. There's more moves that need to happen, but if you squint, you can start to see the forwards look good, the centers look good. Now the question is, like Dwight was saying, do we see Shaedon Sharpe pop this year? Does Scoot Henderson pop? Does Jrue Holiday put this team over the top with the defensive ability and leadership? All good questions I'm very curious to talk about more and find out more as time goes on. We're going to take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be getting into some more audio from the Open, and over the weekend, we'll also be catching up with PGA David Coleman at 5:20. You've got the Rip City Drive. What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here for the Rip City Drive. Scotty Scheffler is the winner of the British Open and the iconic Claret Jug after casually dominating the field this weekend. Scheffler finished minus 17 under par and took the jug by 4 strokes over second place Harris English. NBA veteran Chris Paul has agreed to a 1-year deal with the Clippers in his 21st and expected final season, returns to his longtime franchise. And Damian Lillard's return to Portland press conference less than an hour away. Stay tuned right here, 620 Rip City Radio for live coverage, including some calls after the press conference right here on Trailblazers Courtside. Coming up on the big show, we're going to catch up with PGA David Coleman. Going to be talking some Open. I'm very excited to see if he thinks Scotty Scheffler has crossed over into the next level of dominance. You've got the Rip City Drive here on a Monday.
So in case the Blazers go for a 2 to their best player, Howard is defending him. Batum throws to Lillard. A 3 for the game. Bang!
Whoa! That boy is special.
You've got to pinch me. I must be dreaming.
I'll pinch you.
Lillard has it. No timeout. Dame into the front court. 10 seconds. Lillard now out front against George. 5 seconds. George backing up. Lillard doesn't want to pick. Dame going for the win. A three-pointer for the game. Yeah!
Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive. Who else gets goosebumps? Listen to those iconic Brian Wheeler, Damian Lillard game winners from back in the day. No, folks, we're not in a time machine, but nevertheless, it is Dame time in Portland once again. We're less than an hour away from Damian Lillard officially, even though pen's been to paper, being announced as a member of the Trailblazers once again. He will be at Moda Center press conference coming up at 6 o'clock. Again, Joe Cronin, Dame, most likely Chauncey Billups is 2 expected. Make sure to stay tuned in to Rip City Radio. Sean Highkin will be there for us as well. Dwight James, we just mentioned, he'll be there as well. So keep tabs on Rip City Radio as Damian Lillard's press conference comes up in just under an hour. And man, you know, like going back to what Dwight was saying last hour, it's unfair to assume that Portland's going to get the exact same Damian Lillard that we heard in those 2 clips, because that was a much younger Dame and a Dame in a different point in his career. And as Dwight so fittingly said, Father Time waits for no man. And, you know, he was technically saying that in reference to Jrue Holiday, but I think it applies to Dame too, where, you know, he's coming off an Achilles injury late in his career. And it's hard to quantify what expectations are going to look like. But no matter what, folks, the vibes are good. The memories are back. And I'll be honest, you know, I was one of those people in the camp that was a little just, I don't know how I felt. Just not quite at home when Dame requested the trade. You know, it was, you know, Dame had always kind of seemed like he was, you know, quote, loyal to the soil. And I think Dame was one of those players who, what I had heard from him over the years is like, Dame loved Portland and loved this franchise so much that eventually, you know, if they didn't win a championship, he would be at peace with that, right? He wasn't going to go out and ring chase. And then as soon as the trade request came to Miami, you know, I was a little maybe sour grapes, be honest, and was a little like, oh, okay, so conversation changes a little bit. But at the same token, like everybody had talked about, I was one of those people who thought he probably would come back here and retire a Blazer. I had no idea it was going to be this, you know, come back to Portland this fast. But it really was one of those things where you can't quantify how great it is for the fan base to have him back. I mean, like Dwight was saying, in the span of about a month, right, you maybe got a whole country that's going to become Trailblazers fans with drafting Young Hansen and having the amount of basketball fans following Young Hansen. So that's huge for your franchise. You have a brand new influx of international interest and, you know, everything that goes along with the millions, and I mean hundreds of millions of basketball fans in China. Again, it's, all with time, and I find that to be quite fascinating, is there are more basketball fans in China than there are people in the United States. So naturally, Young Hansen becomes the player that I think he's flashing, just being a solid guy early in his career. You're going to see a big-time international flux of Blazers talent. Then you couple that with bringing back the franchise's, let's just, I know everyone's got an opinion, a top 3 franchise icon, whether or not you want to sit there and say that Bill Walton's your guy or Clyde Drexler's your guy, and I totally understand the arguments either way. But Dame coming back, that was kind of one of the things that I found interesting, is now that Dame comes back, that might cement his legacy, in my opinion, as being the all-time great, because it's not, as we remember, Bill Walton, it was kind of an unceremonious exit back in the day, and Clyde Drexler obviously went to Houston and, didn't return to Portland. So I think there's a possibility for Dame to really kind of set down the legacy that I think he wanted before the whole trade got requested and everything. Call me crazy, but I can squint and see a team that could make some noise when Dame comes back, purely in the sense of, and I don't mean for anybody to be catching strays, but I think Dame in his prime would have jumped over the moon to have wings like Toumani Camara and Denny Avdia behind him. So in that sense, I see where you could throw Dame in a year to a roster that I think this year is going to try to contend. That's very clear with the Jrue Holiday move, and they have some pieces, but you need more. Like, sure, Jrue Holiday can maybe be that stabilizing presence at the guard spot while Dame's out for a year. But like Dwight said, Scoot Henderson needs to explode this year. Shaedon Sharpe needs to explode this year. Denny, needs to prove that Denny can be maybe not a 16, 17 per game score, but 20 plus like we saw. Can Denny be, maybe even more than just a really good player, maybe even a borderline star? Like Dwight said, can Toumani get the offense going and be as much of a threat on that end of the floor and be a true 3-and-D wing? What do we expect from Donovan Clingan, right? He's most likely thrust into a starting role now that the Blazers bought out DeAndre Ayton, and he was so thrilled to go down to L.A. to play with Luka. Again, enjoy the experience, Lakers. I'll be watching that very closely. But nevertheless, again, at least there's no ice that you have to try to dodge to get down to Crypto.com arena. Again, if you know, you know. But nevertheless, you look at the rotation, there's a few questions like, will Robert Williams be in the mix? Obviously, he's projected to be healthy. Will he be able to offer them a whole lot? Hard to say. Then you add in Young Hansen, and I can start to squint and see a team that is at least intriguing. You're seeing some pieces, but the biggest ones, in my opinion, that need to prove it this next year, it's Scoot and Shaedon. And maybe that's Jrue Holiday taking a slightly smaller role and allowing Scoot to kind of thrive. And I go back to what Dwight was saying about how Scoot Henderson, or how Jrue Holiday is just a consummate professional in how he, handles himself, his leadership, and, getting ready to lead Scoot Henderson, Shaedon Sharpe, and kind of, I go back to watching one of the Summer League games when Chauncey Billups talked about how thrilled he was to have Jrue Holiday as a mentor to those young guys. And in that sense, again, I can squint and I can see it. Now, am I getting ahead of my skis thinking playoffs and all these big runs like, we've seen a lot on social media? Not necessarily. I mean, I think it's going to obviously be better than what we've seen, but the reality is Dame won't play this year. And that means we're still going to see an awful lot of the core that we had and potentially even more, right? Because you let some of the fringe pieces, leave, right? Guys like, Jabari Walker, Delano Banton, a couple others as far as just, guys who occasionally got into the mix, and Dwight talked about depth. Now you've got Dame who will, taking up that mid-level exception who won't play this year. So that onus is going to be falling on, those other guys to step up, and the Blazers are kind of going to need to guard against injury. Their ability to be versatile is good, and I think that's why, if that happened, you're going to really see them lean on their two-way players. I think particularly Sidi Sissoko, he's got a big frame, big body. I would not be surprised to see him get in the mix if anything happens injury-wise. Hard to tell on Caleb Love. Still want to see more from him. And, maybe it's Ryan Rupert. Say a guard injury happens and we see Rupert kind of be able to get into the mix. I don't know quite to expect from Roops, but at the same token, he showed some flashes in Summer League that maybe he could kind of be at that point where he's a little bit more developed in his career. He was kind of a project coming out of the draft a few years ago, but Roop could be a guy who's in that mix as well. So, again, if I squint, I can see it. I don't know if that's still partially rose-colored glasses that I'll admit to having to an extent, but, folks, just make no mistake, there's some excitement with this Trailblazer team again. Just having the ability to be excited about the Blazers. I feel we got it a little bit last year when the team flirted with the play-in and was kind of making that run, as we talked about, had a good defensive rating and showed some really good things. But I don't know if it's like the same kind of excitement that now Dame just brings back as a whole, even though he's not going to play for an entire year. Like, the getting him back, like the fan base is thrilled, right? I mean, it's one thing I asked for in the YouTube comments on Rip City Radio YouTube, and everybody was just, kind of talking about how thrilled they are to have Damian Lillard, back in the mix as far as what he means to the city of Portland. And dare I take it even a step further? I didn't get a chance to talk about it with Dwight, but we got some Blazers guests on the program tomorrow, and your boy is back, so we'll talk about it then. But how much value can having Damian Lillard and Young Hansen add to a team that's going to be, or that is being put up for sale? Maybe I'm overblowing it a little bit, but thinking about what Dame's meant to this franchise and his kind of cachet as an NBA 75 player, and then now Young Hansen potentially bringing over an entire country of fans that are going to be, switching out the red and black of the Houston Rockets for the red and black of the Portland Trailblazers. It's intriguing. It really is. So all that's to say is, I think there's more positive than negative with the Damian coming back. I understand where maybe pessimists can be a little bit more pessimistic, and I can see that. And I think you have to address any situation objectively to try to truly get the true viewpoint of it. But as I kind of break it down, I think there are far more positives than negatives. It's a little bit of a bold move, and like worst case scenario, say Dame doesn't come back to be the player that he is, or is, significantly hampered by the injury. It's not necessarily a long-term situation either, and it's a palatable cost, if that. And on the other side, if Dame has a Kevin Durant-like recovery, again, just thinking positively, and comes back to, being a, let's just say, 20-plus per night scorer, if given the amount of minutes, you're like, oh, wow, okay, the Blazers are getting Dame for a steal, and I make that joke that I made about Dwight. Like, I don't think anybody in the NBA wants to see Dame necessarily not succeed as much as the Milwaukee Bucks, because I tell you, folks, with how much they are going to be paying Dame over the stretch and wage provision over the next 5 years, let's just say Dame comes back and is like Kevin Durant. Oh, it's going to be a Moneyball situation with Brad Pitt and David Justice, where it's like, yeah, the Bucks think, that's what the Bucks think about you. That's what they thought about you when you tore your Achilles. They were better off paying money for you to play against them. And it's a little cliche, I know, but I think it applies well, and I think that's where there are some risks, and I understand where that comes from, but for the most part, I think it's a pretty positive thing for the franchise, the city, the fan base needs this, and it's going to be a feel-good story PR-wise for quite some time. And, I think we're at a point where fans are just going to be real thrilled to have the letter O back in Portland, man. It's pretty sweet, I'm not going to lie. All right, let's go ahead and take a break. When we come back, PGA David Coleman on the Rip City Drive. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Monday afternoon. Final hour, final guest slot here. Brendan Slaughter with you. Reminder that we'll have Damian Lillard's press conference live on 620 Rip City Radio at 6 o'clock. We'll also take your calls after. But now, without further ado, very pleased to welcome back to the program our very own PGA Pro, Dave Coleman, back on the show to talk some Open. Dave, what's going on, man? How are you?
Hey, Brendan, thanks for having me back on, man. It's great. It's great to talk about Scotty Scheffler and that win he had at Royal Portrush, and what a good week for golf. Oh, but by the way, cool for you guys to get Cowherd back on live. He's got a great show.
Oh, we're definitely excited about it. And honestly, Dave, I was pretty excited I got to talk to you about the Open because I learned recently, and actually where he is right now, Chad's at a charity golf event right now, and he's like, you got to talk to Dave, talk Open. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm all over it. And then, we get the Scotty Scheffler. Like, I got a lot to ask you about him, Dave, but let's just start, first, are we sure he's human? And I mean that in the nicest way possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible, Brendan. I mean, to think about, where his game is at and, look at his putting. I mean, how much it's improved the last couple of years. I mean, he was always a good putter by tour standards, but he was never a great putter. And I think he's improved so much since he's gone to work with Phil Kenyon. And, it's interesting, a year and a half ago or so, Rory gave him some advice to use a mallet-style putter, which is a more forgiving type putter with a little bit bigger head, a little bit more MOI, which is like a moment of inertia. It's kind of a term you hear a lot with putters now when people go get fit for them at a course or at a PGA Superstore or something like that. And Scheffler, by using this putter, really has become a great putter. And you're seeing more and more pros on the PGA Tour, LPGA Tour, use these style of putters. So there's no doubt, I mean, that has really transcended his game. And I'll tell you one thing, man, it could take him to a level that we might see him. I don't know if he'll get to the Tiger or Jack level, number of majors won, but I definitely think to get up where Tom Watson is, Gary Player, there's no doubt he could be in that category, I think.
And again, catching up with PJ Dave here on the Rip City Drive, I think the thing that kind of goes under the radar a little bit, Dave, is this is just, another major for him, his fourth, obviously. But this is the second or third I can remember he's won by a pretty comfortable margin. There wasn't a whole lot of drama down the stretch of this.
No, there really wasn't. And, you look at the guys that were, chasing him, guys that, obviously are Chris Goddard is a guy that, really a lot of people didn't know a ton about, until last week with the win at the Scottish Open. So I think to expect a guy who really hadn't played a ton of links golf to put pressure on him on a day where there was no wind, I didn't think people saw him doing that. Harris English had a very good week. He played great in the PGA as well this year. I think a guy that's possibly could be on the Ryder Cup team this year. But Rory was way too far back. Bryson, had struggled so much in that first round. He made a great comeback to get where he was. But there's no doubt that, Scheffler, with that big of a lead, that's really hard to, come back against. And we saw that for years with Tiger, and Scheffler's starting to have that same kind of influence, or an impact where, he's playing so well that I think he might be a little bit inside some of these guys' heads as well, because I think he's a guy that is he's stoic and he's quiet. I think he's funny. You've heard some stories where he's kind of an underrated jokester,
sure.
and he maybe keeps things lighthearted at times. But I think he's got that killer instinct like Tiger has, and I think that might intimidate some guys out there, on the tour. So it's going to be really interesting to see, how guys can, up their games to, play with Scotty, especially in the majors.
Absolutely. And you talked about just, kind of the gap that Scotty is creating. And I was just, you mentioned Tiger as well. I just have to ask right off the bat, Dave, has there been a guy who, since Tiger, has kind of been able to create such a gap between him and to your point, I was listening to some of the audio from Rory and Jordan Spieth. They are chasing him constantly, and that reminds me so much of Tiger.
Yeah, it really does. There's no doubt about it. And, you mentioned Rory and Spieth, and Rory's had some years and some moments where he's played really well, But I think Rory's kind of more like a Phil Mickelson, where he plays at a really, really high level, and he amazes us with some of these shots he hits, but he doesn't have the consistency that Tiger had, and obviously what Scheffler has right now. And Spieth, to me, is more like Spieth is kind of like a modern-day Ben Crenshaw, maybe a little bit of Arnold Palmer, where he can make these heroic up and downs, and he can make these unbelievable putts. But I don't think Spieth tee to green was ever good enough, to be consistent at that high of a level. He's obviously a great player. You had those great early years on the tour, but I think he chased distance a little bit too much. And then I think the other problem with Spieth is he's had some injuries. And I think when you have the injuries out there on the tour, it's hard to come back from those injuries. So I think there's no doubt that Scheffler, to me, if he can stay healthy, that's going to be a big factor in this. And I think, you look at the way he works out, you look at, how he's really learned, too, with his schedule, Brendan, that he doesn't need to play every week. You heard him in his press conference after he won. He's already talking about Memphis in a couple weeks, so he's not going to play the 3M this week. He's not going to play at Greensboro, but, he'll probably celebrate this one for a couple days, and then he'll get right back to work with his great coach, Randy Smith in Dallas, and they'll start, putting together a game plan for Memphis there for the first leg of the playoffs.
Absolutely. Catching up with PJ Dave here on the Rip City Drive. Scotty is obviously a superstar, likely on the path to being an all-time great. But, Dave, the thing about him is he's not your typical superstar. He doesn't seek the spotlight. He loves his time away from the game, big on family and faith. How unique of a person and player is Scotty?
I think it's pretty unique because, he doesn't really have a big, presence with social media. He doesn't really want to do commercials and all that stuff. So I think there's no doubt he's unique. But I think what he really likes is he likes, practicing. He likes, going out and digging it out of the dirt, like when he was a kid. So I think he's in love with the game as much as he's ever been. And I think there's no doubt when he gets away from tournaments and he has his off weeks, I think there's two things that he loves. Obviously, his family, his faith is very important, but I think golf, and I think he loves the practice and getting after it in his off weeks and playing probably money matches with other tour players there in Dallas and, working with his coach on his game. And I think there's no question that drives him as much as anything, because I think it's pretty cool to see when a guy like that is out there, on the tour, that high of a level, he can still live a normal life. And I think that's what he always wanted. I think that his parents obviously raised him in a really exceptional fashion, as a kid. I don't think they were super well off. They obviously had money, but I don't think they were millionaires or anything like that. So I think that humbled him, when he was younger. So I think all that, you combine that, with a guy who's super talented and super driven, I think it's helped him stay in the present and never look too far in the future, but don't look in the past at your failures too. So I think it's been the right mix of everything to make him the player that he is.
I remember the last time you and I talked, Dave, you compared Scotty to the San Antonio Spurs in their heyday. Not flashy, but just quietly got the rings and got the job done. I think you might need to double or triple down on that, Dave, because the more and more I think about it, it fits like a glove.
Yeah, it really does. There's no doubt about it. Yeah, he's very similar to Tim Duncan, that whole Spurs organization. They do all the fundamental things right. People talk about, Scotty's footwork and everything. And the biggest thing is that works for him. And that's like the Spurs, going out and finding these guys from overseas. And then what happened in the NBA? We saw more and more teams go out and get, guys from overseas.
Sure.
So I think what you're going to see with Scotty, and you're going to see more and more coaches teaching guys to swing your swing. You heard Arnold Palmer say that many, many years ago, and just play your game. And I think that's the thing that Scheffler does so well. He plays his game. His swing, you look at the technique of his swing, it looks really good. The feet and moving around a little bit, that's a little unique, but you know what? It works for him, and that's all that matters. And it works really well. He repeats it, and I think that's the biggest thing about him. The more he can repeat that, man, oh man, I mean, that's going to be, so important for him, because I think that having those solid fundamentals, especially when you get under pressure in a big tournament like the Ryder Cup coming up, where it's going to be a raucous atmosphere, and I think the Europeans are going to be favored, even though it's here in America at Best Stage Black. I mean, I think when you have that solid fundamental base, it can translate to any golf course anywhere.
Yeah, catching back up with Scotty Scheffler, one other thing that Jordan Spieth mentioned is that Scotty Scheffler, he made the comparison to Nikola Jokic of the NBA, a very, kind of unassuming superstar, but probably the best player on the planet. And I actually kind of really liked the comparison because I think it's apt. Like, for my money, Jokic is the best player in the NBA, but he clearly has other things outside of basketball that he loves and values and prioritizes. And it's kind of interesting to know that, like, there are some of those kind of unassuming superstars out there because we just don't expect it in today's world.
No, we really don't. You really don't expect that anymore. I think what it is a lot of guys, they want to have their own life, especially away from the game. And I think the one thing about Scheffler, like last week, that press conference he gave early in the week, I think it was Tuesday. Like Monday was Rory's day last week for, with the media. Tuesday was Scheffler's day. And Scheffler kind of came in there saying, like, yeah, I love golf. I love to play. But at the same time, like, my family and my personal life is more important. That's what defines me more than being a professional golfer. And everybody was talking about it. Everybody had a take about it. And the fact of the matter was, like, he's right. That's what should be more important. We can't judge guys on, what they do, for a small window of their professional career, whatever sport it's in. Obviously, golf is a little bit longer than these other sports because it's not as physically taxing as, playing the NFL or the NHL or the NBA or Major League Baseball. But there's no doubt that Scheffler knows the importance of raising his son, and he'll probably have another kid or two down the road, I'm sure, with his wife. And they'll probably say that, hey, raising that kid or those kids is way more important in the right way because, the golf is always going to be there for him. He's always going to have the ability to do that. But to me, I think his kids growing up to be, good kids is more important theoretically than, hey, I can hit a 3-wood off a downhill lie from 300 yards into the wind and fly it pin high. That's great. But at the end of the day, the way you handle yourself as a person is probably more vital and more important than what you accomplish, in athletics.
Yeah, and to that point, Dave, I don't consider myself to be a big softy or anything, but I'm not going to lie. I thought it was pretty cool, pretty cute with Scotty's kid there at the end and seeing that whole celebration. Like, I just think it kind of humanizes athletes a little bit.
It really does, and I was listening to Sirius XM, the PGA Tour channel today, and they were talking about, like, there's a Nike ad, I guess, that's either coming out or it came out.
I've seen it.
About Scotty and his kid, and I haven't seen it yet, but I'll take a look at it when I get a chance. And they were talking about how, I think the son, his son is involved in it. And, yeah, I think, it really shows a different side to him, and it shows that, this guy is truly like a real role model.
Right.
And let's hope everything we're seeing from him is legitimate. If he can keep on this path, Brendan, where he's winning, at a very high level, winning several tournaments a year, winning majors, and he is legitimate off the course, with his marriage and as a family man. I mean, that's what Jack Nicklaus did, and that was why I think a lot of people had so much respect for Nicklaus because he was able to combine playing on the PGA Tour at an extremely high level and doing all this family stuff.
Right.
So I think that's going to be the fascinating thing. Can Scheffler keep that up? Obviously, a lot of credit to the team around him and his wife and his family as well, because they're obviously thrown into the limelight, and they seem like they're living very normal lives.
Sure.
So, that's a really special thing to see in a day and age where everybody wants a piece of somebody, and I think Scheffler's been able to keep the media at bay, but I think he gives good answers, too, in his press conferences. He doesn't, just give your sugar, he doesn't sugarcoat anything, doesn't give any nonsense. Like, he gives you good answers, especially when it is a golf question. He really is able to answer pretty well, And, like, the comment that stuck with me, like he said, I'm already thinking about Memphis.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, he's already probably thinking about that 18th hole at TPC Southwind, and now it's a dogleg left, and there's water on the left, and, I got to squeeze it in between the bunkers there. So that he's got his mind on all this stuff, because that's what a great player and a great champion does, not only in sports, but definitely in golf.
Right. And just, everything, totally agree with everything you were saying there, Dave. And I take it, a little bit further. And when I kind of saw this, like, just to prove Scott, like, if you need more proof of Scotty Scheffler's humility, I know it kind of got, it got put in the rear view. But again, Dave, just in your opinion, how many people, if they were the best golfer in the world, would have handled that phony arrest so much different and been like, do you know who I am? I am the best golfer in the world. Like, it just, even how humbly he was like, yeah, no, had an incident, all good. Like, it's incredible.
It really was, yeah. There's no doubt about it. Going back to that a year and a half ago in Louisville, it's almost surreal that happened. But, yeah, he handled it very, very well. You could see, and plus he's a very popular player with all the guys on the PGA Tour, with the guys he knew who are on Live now when he played with them more on the PGA Tour. When he came out to the range that day, after he came back to the course, you could see how popular he was, and, it was really, really important. So there's no doubt about it. Scheffler is a guy that, has got the fans on his side. He's got the media on his side, the players on his side. He's been very good, too, about all this Live stuff. When they've asked him questions about it, he's had a direct answer, and that's it. He's never expanded on it. And how about this, too? I heard this today as well. He never got involved with that simulator, the TGL thing that Tiger was involved with. I don't think he wants anything to do with it, because he wants to work on his own game. And he's one of the few guys, too, Brendan, that doesn't live. He might have a house or a condo or something in West Palm, Jupiter area, or in Scottsdale, but his primary residence is in Dallas, where he grew up.
Right.
So it says a lot about him. He's stuck to his roots, where he's from, and so it says a lot about who this guy really is at the end of the day. So he's a fascinating guy.
Yeah.
People say he's boring. I think he's fascinating, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I would go with you, too. I mean, I understand where it's like he's maybe not like the flashiest or the sexiest golfer out there, but he gets it done. And, to your point, like, I'm sure, I think that speaks to the humility, too, Dave, because just from what I'm able to look at, I don't think Scotty's hurting for money and could probably buy a house anywhere in the world he wanted to.
Yeah, he probably could, and I'm sure he probably does. He probably has a place down there in South Florida, or
sure.
In Scottsdale, somewhere where when the weather does get crummy in Dallas, he can go play and practice. But I'll tell you one thing. I think, at least from like what all I've seen, is like I think he always wants to spend time with his wife and his kid and his family. So it really is. I mean, it's a great thing for golf that he's on top right now, because I feel like these other guys, Rory, Koepka, Rahm, obviously they're all-time great players, but they're not as consistent, and I don't know if they dive into the details as much as Scheffler did. I mean, like, remember the U.S. Open, how animated Scheffler got with his coach on the range. So that shows how much this guy wants it, and even on his off weeks, man, he's still right there in the mix, and that's a hard thing to do, because how many times have we seen athletes on their off days? Mahomes in the Super Bowl, LeBron at certain times in the NBA Finals, where he started missing a lot of 3-pointers, and he's just trying to keep his team in the game. Scheffler, the consistency, that is the one thing about him, and that is so hard to find in golf, man. If you have consistency in golf, that's a special thing to have. Hard to find, especially at that high of a level.
Catching up with PGA Dave. Dave, just a couple more questions for you. Really appreciate your time. Scotty is now just a U.S. Open away from being the 7th men's golfer to achieve the Grand Slam. Barring health, of course, it's all but inevitable, right?
I think he'll do it. Yeah, I think there's no doubt he'll get it done. I think, Scheffler, to me, the one nowadays, too, is like, obviously with private jets and everything, and these guys playing the schedules they play, he could go to Shinnecock and play a million practice rounds with members there, with the club pro, with the assistant pros there. he could go out there with, his caddy. He could go out there with his friends. So he could get out there and play a ton of rounds and get, all kinds of intricate knowledge about the golf course. So there's no doubt about it that Scheffler definitely is a guy that will be focusing and locked in on that next year like he does every tournament. And, I think there's no doubt he will win a U.S. Open. I think just, Pinehurst was a different golf course. Oakmont, the rough was so deep. But Scheffler's too good of a player not to win a U.S. Open.
Catching up with PGA Dave here on the Rip City Drive. One more thing on Scotty, and then I just got a couple other things to ask you. Appreciate your time again, Dave. I loved hearing the story about Scotty and how he essentially has a secret Chipotle in Dallas because the one near SMU's campus is always, going to recognize him. Again, just going back to what we talked about earlier, like when I heard this, I hate to double down, but I don't have a better word. It just humanizes these athletes. And I was like, how many people in Dallas are like, oh, wow, like Scotty Scheffler is at like a Chipotle? You know how many superstars would never go in a Chipotle themselves?
Yeah. It's really interesting because, just that whole story about him, going there and, eating there probably, with his wife. I maybe, and definitely before his son was born, he probably spent more time doing things like that. I think it just shows that he's a guy that, wants to live a normal life. And I think that's very important. And I think that, the biggest thing that's important about that is when, you're playing out on the tour and you're traveling all the time, you are going from city to city. And even when you're at home, you have to really live in sort of a bubble. And you have to make sure that golf is your everything, but it's not going to beat you down so much when you're not playing well. I think that's what he really does well. And that's why I think when he goes out to a place like that, he wants to be out with the rest of the world. So, yeah, I think that's a special thing, and that's great for him to do that. And I think maybe he'll get a sponsor out of it as well down the road because that was a pretty cool moment in his interview after the win yesterday.
Oh, it was awesome. Just two more things left for you here, Dave. Appreciate your time. You mentioned Bryson earlier. Just want to get your thoughts on him. Mm-hmm. I think he rallied from a pretty poor first day to finish, tied for 10th. Yep. What did you make of kind of Bryson kind of fighting back through the tough links course over the couple days?
Oh, I thought it was great. I thought, when you saw him whiff that shot on Thursday in the rough on number one, when he was in the rough to the right of the fairway there on one, you're like, this could be a really tough week for him. And then, he made some great comments about, he thought about his late father, how he would never give up. And his father had a lot of health problems. His father battled, until he passed away. And Bryson battled and he fought. And I think that said a lot to Keegan Bradley, the Ryder Cup captain. And Keegan Bradley basically said, and I saw it this morning on ESPN, that, Bryson's on the Ryder Cup team. So I think that performance did a lot for Bryson. It did a lot for his spot, obviously, in the Ryder Cup team. And I think Bryson, it's unbelievable the change we've seen in his career where he's gone from being this, kind of nerdy wrestling heel to being this superstar that people love. And he's transcended the game with, obviously, all his stuff he does on social media. And he's probably one of the few guys that went to live that it actually really has worked out for the better for. I mean, obviously these guys' bank accounts have expanded a lot, but a lot of their games have not gotten better. Bryson's game has gotten better since he went to the Live Tour. And I really think that, to me, he's going to be a big part of this Ryder Cup team. And if we can pull the upset, I look at the Europeans as the favorite right now, but Bryson has to be one of the leaders of that team to take down a guy like Rory, to take down, that great European roster, because there's a lot of players on the European team that are going to be really tough to beat in a Ryder Cup.
And you just hit me with my last question, Dave. That's what I had, is now that the majors are behind us, we're looking to the Ryder Cup. Just kind of expand upon that a little bit and just your expectations for the Ryder Cup.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the FedEx Cup playoffs are coming up. We got those three events in August. That's the crown jewel, the PGA Tour. Those will be fascinating to watch. Obviously, there's a lot of money on the line. But I think what most people are looking, they'll watch that. and I obviously will too. But I think the Ryder Cup is going to be a huge event at Bethpage Black. I've been able to play that course about 20 years ago. I played it a few times when I qualified for the New York State Open when I lived in New York State. And it's an unbelievable golf course. It's a course that favors a real long hitter. We saw Tiger win there. We saw Brooks Koepka win there. Lucas Glover win there. I think Patrick Reed won a playoff event there, several years ago. So it favors a guy who is a long hitter. You got to really hit your driver well. The greens are pretty realistic there. They're not like Oakmont or Augusta where they're super undulated and unfair. There's no doubt, though, the greens are very fair, where you can definitely get, you can make some putts there, but you got to drive it well. I would think the rough will be pretty deep. And the big thing about that golf course at Bethpage is you've really got to be able, like I said, hit the driver well, but you've got to be able to, get off to a good start, because the first few holes are manageable, but when you get to the middle of the course, man, there are some really long par fours there and some holes that, just going to beat you up if you're not playing well. So it's going to be a great test. The crowds are going to be unbelievable there. But the Europeans, I'll tell you this, the Europeans have a very good roster. Obviously, Rory's going to be there. You're going to see Rahm on that team, Shane Lowry, Fitzpatrick, who played well, Sepp Straka, who's had a good year, Bobby Mack, Robert McIntyre, the lefty, is probably going to be on that team. So the Europeans are going to have a really, really good team, and I think we're going to have to go with some younger guys. I think like a Chris Goddard might be on the team. And I think one thing about Keegan Bradley is he won't be phony with who he takes. It's not going to be a good old boys network. He's going to pick the guys who are playing best, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And we should be the underdogs, but I'd love to see us rise up and win it, especially at Bethpage, which is an awesome golf course.
It's going to be interesting to keep an eye on over the summer for sure. Dave, look forward to when you and I can catch up again down the line. This was awesome, and heavily appreciate you, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for all the time tonight, Brendan. Dude, you do a great job, and say hello to Chad for me. I hope he hit him well today. And thanks so much for giving me all the time to break down Scheffler's win and everything in the world of golf. It was a great time tonight, buddy.
Oh, it was my pleasure too, and I'm sure knowing Chad and how long he's good at his golf game, I'm sure he had a good day today. Puts a lot of pride into it. Dave, appreciate the time. Thank you so much. We'll go ahead and take a quick break on the Rip City Drive, have an abbreviated short segment when we come back before we get you guys ready for Damian Lillard's re-introductory press conference as a Portland Trailblazer. You got the Rip City Drive. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive here on a Monday. Brendan Slaughter with you. Quick little abbreviated segment here as we went along with Dave Coleman. Reminder, we're going to have Damian Lillard's press conference live on 620 Rip City Radio in just about 6 minutes. Make sure to stay tuned after Damian Lillard's press conference as we will have an abbreviated call-in show as well. Give us a call, 503-248-0620. Big thanks to Michael Shacker for producing the show today. I'll be back on tomorrow, and we'll stay tuned with you guys through Dame's press conference.
So in case the Blazers go for a 2 to their best player, Howard is defending him. Batum throws to Lillard. A 3 for the game. Bang!
Whoa! That boy is special.
You've got to pinch me. I must be dreaming.
I'll pinch you.
Alrighty, folks. Brendan Slaughter here on the Rip City Drive. We were going to play some Dame highlights, but Dame is at the podium with Chauncey Billups and Joe Cronin. We are going to go to that momentarily. Dame is holding up the familiar letter O Lillard jersey at Moda Center, and big smiles from Dame, Chauncey Billups, and Joe Cronin. We have audio confirmed. Okay, no, we're still waiting on audio for Damian Lillard's press conference. Again, the feed gotcha. The feed has started. We're just waiting for Dame and Joe Cronin and Chauncey Billups to get underway. Man, it's good to see Dame back with the red and white pinwheel, man. It is it's pretty sweet. So again, just stand by with us here momentarily as we'll be hearing from Joe Cronin right now.
Great day in Portland. You got 3 really happy guys up here. This is, awesome news for the Trailblazers organization, for the city of Portland, for the Pacific Northwest. It's a happy day. I had a former Trailblazer text me right after the news broke. He said, everything's right in the NBA again. And I just smiled and nodded, and it was like, yeah, I mean, it is. It never felt right seeing Damian in a different jersey, and, we're really excited, of course, to bring him back to Portland and put him in that red and black. So, we'll get into a few opening statements and answer any questions you have, but just really thankful to Dame for trusting in us, for believing in us, and for coming back. So send it over to Chauncey.
Yeah, same thing for me, really. This is a happy day for all of us. Really, really excited to have Dame back. It's been a process. I think if we're all being honest, we obviously never wanted to see him go. And even when he did, we all wanted to see him back. So it worked out perfect. I always just believe that things happen how they're supposed to. And unfortunately, he's hurt right now, and he'll be back as good as ever, if you know anything about him. So we're really excited about that. I told him that this year he's going to be the highest paid assistant coach in league history because I'm going to be putting him to work every day. So we're really excited. We're really happy to have our guy back. Go ahead, Dollar.
For me, personally, well, first I want to thank Joe, and I want to thank Chauncey because, obviously for this to even be possible, we all had to be on the same page about it. But like they both said, it never felt right not being home, and through it all, I found my way back, and just fortunate to be back with the group that I was with prior to leaving, to be a part of a great situation at home. And I'm just excited, and really, really thankful and appreciative of the door being open for me to come back, even with me being hurt. And, it means a lot to me to not only play for this organization again. I never wanted to not be playing for this organization, but to be back in this community, that I'm most familiar with, the familiar faces, all of the things that I've been connected to, even during the time that I wasn't playing here the last 2 years. So it all just feels right. Usually when I have to make a decision, I put a lot of thought into it. I ask a lot of questions to the people around me, but this was a decision that wasn't hard at all for me to make. And, the people that I know love me and care about me, it was a easy piece of advice for them to give. It was easy for them to, to support. So, like I said, I'm just thankful to be back. And it just feels like the perfect situation at the perfect time. So I'm just happy to be back.
Brenna Green, Coin 6 Sports. Damian, If I would have told you 2 years ago you would be sitting here right now doing this press conference, what would have your reaction been?
I probably would have been like, I don't know, you know. That's a little. In just 2 years, I probably wouldn't have believed it. I'd be lying if I said I didn't expect this to happen at some point, but for it to happen this soon, I wasn't expecting this.
For Dame and for Joe, Mike Richmond, can you talk about the process of kind of how this came together? When did you guys start talking about it? What did sort of the conversations look like and the meetings look like that led to this happening?
Once we learned Dame was leaving the Bucks, you know, it all happened pretty smooth and organically. Chauncey and I sat down with him a few times and had some really good conversations. You know, a lot of, you know, talking about goals and, you know, what the Trailblazers are trying to accomplish, what he's trying to accomplish, and seeing if those, you know, goals aligned. And I think we knew very early on that those goals were very similar, and the key thing there was just work out a deal and let's get this done, and it was really that smooth.
Lindsay Schnell, The Athletic. Dame, I'm curious, can you tell us how you told your kids that you were coming home and what their reaction is? I'm guessing Dame Jr. is old enough to like really get it. The twins might have been a little confused.
They're all old enough to pick up on it now, especially Dame Jr., but I didn't say nothing to them about it until Saturday when I actually signed, and they were with me. And we got back in the car to go home. And I got to a red light, and I just turned around, and my daughter was looking at me, and I told her, and she was like, wait, so like we don't have to get on the airplane to Milwaukee no more? I was like, yeah, like y'all don't gotta get on the plane no more. And she was like, so you're gonna be at your house in Portland the whole time? I was like, yeah. And she was like, what? Like she was. And then her brothers was kind of listening to that back and forth, and they were all extremely excited. So I saved it for when I knew it was official.
With the Oregonian, Dame, what expectation are you setting for yourself after this year of rehab? What kind of player do you expect to be in 2026?
I mean, I think it's obviously a tough injury, but me personally, I know how I'm going to approach the whole rehab process, taking my time. A lot of trust in the people around me, a lot of trust in the surgeon that I went to. We've stayed connected. And I think I'm a return to form. That's just my true belief. I think I'll return to form. I think with this injury, a lot of the people that I've spoke to that have experienced the injury and come back for it, a lot of the surgeons that I spoke to, a lot of the PTs that I've spoken to, have shared a lot of information with me, and a lot of it was encouraging for me. And I know what my assignment is to make that happen, and that's what I've been focused on doing. So it's a pretty slow process. That's why I'm taking the next season to make sure that I check every box and that I don't rush, especially at my age. But I expect to return to form.
Rose Garden Report. This would be for, I guess, both Joe and Dame. Is there any possibility at all that Dame plays this upcoming season, or is the understanding that this is just a rehab year?
We're going to do what's best for Dame. And, you know, never say never in this world, but all that matters is him coming back to form, and that'll take as long as it takes, and we won't go a second faster than that.
My prideful self would be thinking differently, but I think that with age you get wiser, and like Joe said, it's going to be, you know, ultimately what's best, and I think to take as much time as possible to make sure that I'm right, that's what I'll do.
Dan Carriagers, so assuming you don't play this next season, what will your role be? What will you do as far as the team on hands and that sort of thing? And then what role do you expect to play when you do get back?
I think not playing, just wanting to still have an impact on the team and still be present with the team. I think when you've been around the league for as long as I have, and you know you've had as much experience as I've had on the floor every day in practice, just being in this league and having a significant role. It's a lot to share. It's a lot that you need time to learn in the NBA. A lot of things you just learn over your amount of time. And with this being a younger team, it's a lot of things that I can share, without having to be on the floor. And I think that'll be my main job this year. Like Chauncey said, I'm basically going to be like an assistant coach. So I'll be around, and my investment in the team will be the same as if I was playing, as far as like my time and where my energy is placed. And I think once I'm playing, it'll be the same. One thing that I've missed over the last 2 years playing on an older team is I'm able to be more and give more when I have something to pour into. When I'm able to be invested in others' careers more, being around younger players. So with this team, I have plenty of opportunity to do that, especially having a young rising point guard like Scoot that I'm gonna be, playing with now, and Tumani and Denny and Shaden, who I was with his rookie year. So just being around those guys and having so much to share and being able to pour into them and be a part of, their continued progress is something that elevates me as a player and as a teammate and as a leader. So, I'm looking forward to that as well, even when I'm playing.
Danny Meringue, 105.1 The Fan. In your previous tenure, you were a flag bearer not only for the team, but the city, the organization, all of it. Just kind of what are your thoughts on being that right now as the team's up for sale, and Adam Silver's comments about the preference of staying in Portland, it's the pride and thoughts that you've had of being that guy and being that guy again?
The city of Portland and the Trailblazers as an organization is just important to me. It's never been something that I've had to try and go out and do, and make myself something. It's just how I feel, and I go off of, what my true feelings are. So it was always genuine for the first 11 years of my career, and it was also always organic. I never had to go out of my way to do something or make something appear to be a certain way, and I think this will be the same. I don't need to try to announce myself as that or anything. I just operate as myself, and that's always been good enough. And I think, especially at this stage of my career, I think it'll remain the same.
Casey Holdall, Trailblazers.com. Dame and Chauncey. Dame, could you speak? You did this now, but could you speak a little more about kind of your thoughts on the team as currently constructed, particularly how it's maybe different from the team that you were on your last season here? And Chauncey, I know it's probably kind of early, but have you thought at all about how you're going to use Dame once he is able to get back out there?
Should I go first?
Why don't you go first, Dame?
I think one thing that when we all sat down and this idea kind of started to move towards me signing back here, obviously I'm gonna look at the basketball situation. We play basketball, and you want to win basketball games. So a lot of people, may look at it as a family decision, and obviously anybody would have their family be a part of a decision that they make, but this was just as much a basketball decision. I've watched the team even at a distance. I've followed and stayed in touch with what was going on, and looking at how the league is transitioning and how it's changing. It's not the same old thing no more. It's young teams that guard and that have depth and that compete, that are connected, and this team has all of those things. Maybe because it's Portland, people may not be willing to say it, but it's all there. From the talent to the depth to having it on both sides of the ball, it's all there. And that's something that I believed in when I looked into a decision like this. So the personal part, the family, the basketball, the fact that this opportunity came unexpected, being waived, it just felt like like I said, it just felt like the perfect timing and the perfect opportunity.
What you asked me again, man? Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a long way from now. Obviously, I'm more excited right now to have Dame back, and like he said, just pouring into our young guys. I want to see Scoop and Shaden take a step this year. You know, of course, you know, I coach these guys very hard, but it's always different when you're getting that mentorship and that tutelage from a guy that wears a jersey. And to have Dame and to have Drew and have these guys pouring into him, I'm really, really excited about that. And then when we get to that point, we get there, you know. But I'm really excited about what we've been able to do this summer and what our team looks like right now. And when Dame is able to come back, we'll be super ready for him. But I'm really not even thinking about a year from now. You know, I'm thinking about this year.
Hey, Damian. Annie Peterson from AP. You know, you said it was also a basketball decision, but how much did being with your kids in the same city factor into your decision? How much did that mean to you?
It meant a lot. I mean, it's my kids, so it only made it that much sweeter. But to that same point, even when I wasn't here, I created a situation where I could still be with my kids as often as possible. So, like I said, that was part of it. You know, it's well documented that I'm a family guy, and when you have kids, that's even more so the case. You know, once you have kids of your own. So, obviously, that's a part of that. You know, it makes it that much better. But the same is to be said about, you know, basketball and what I've always wanted to accomplish in a Trailblazer uniform, and now looking at the team and it, in my opinion, being positioned to do, you know, what I've always wanted to have opportunity to do.
Just the Oregonian. My question is mainly for Joe. How do you go through the next 15 months in terms of trying to build this thing, make moves, knowing that Dame's going to be coming online in 2026? And do you feel that sense of, you know, urgency to try and put something together that maybe can make a run when you failed to do that last time?
Mm-hmm. We're really, really excited about the steps we've taken so far, and we know we have a really good player coming, you know, a year from now. And I think our challenge this year is to keep getting better and keep prepping to take that next step. And once Dame gets back, he's going to catapult us even further. You know, we're going to keep doing this the way we've done it. We're going to develop our guys. We're going to get better and better. We're going to be opportunistic in trades. We're going to keep recruiting in free agency and, you know, go into next summer with plenty of ammunition to keep getting better. And that's a goal. Like, it's winning time now for the Trailblazers. Chauncey and I have been saying that all year last season, and that's what this is. And, you know, how we go about that, we'll figure it out as we keep taking our steps.
Dame, Nick Krupke from KPTV. We heard about the joy in your kids' faces, but in that stoplight, in that moment, you're not flying back to Milwaukee. As a dad, what was that moment for you to be able to actually tell them and have a relief of, yeah, I'm here, we're here together?
It was a great moment. I think I've never been somebody that just get overly excited, or I don't express myself that way. The inside, it might be a whole lot going on, but on the outside, you might not always be able to see it. But I think in that moment, it was just a great feeling for me, not only just sharing that moment with my kids, but just I'm pulling up to a familiar stoplight, you know, right here at Bridgeport, and I know my way around here. So just knowing that, you know, I'm going to be back home, you know, for all parts of my life, you know, with my kids, playing for the Trailblazers, driving on the same streets that I've driven on pretty much my entire adulthood. My whole family being here, my mom, my brother, my sisters, all my friends around the city of Portland. You know, all of those things count. And like I said, I wasn't expecting it to happen so soon, you know. So the fact that everything worked out the way it did, you know, even though some of it was unfortunate, the fact that it happened and, you know, all of these things was able to come to life, you know, I was real thankful for that. So it was a lot of emotion in that moment for my kids, but for myself as well.
Orlando Sanchez, KGW TV. Dame, there's been a buzz around the city since it became official. What has the feedback been from this fan base, and what does it mean to be embraced the way that you are in the city?
It means a lot. You know, I think it was something that I never wanted to happen to begin with. You know, even once it was like I knew I was being traded, like I don't know if I ever let it go. You know, it was hard to let go, just the love that I have for Portland, you know, the community, the organization, everything. You know, it was a hard time. So I think over the course of my career, all of the fans, you know, everybody throughout the community, I think they've always known that it was like genuine coming from me, you know, by my actions and not by words. So I think when it was announced that I was coming back, I think those were the emotions, you know. It wasn't just about basketball. I think it was everything. And, you know, people just happy and excited to have me back, you know, just as a presence and as a person, you know, representing this city and the organization. And I think that, you know, as a man, I think that means more than anything, you know, when people respect who you are and what you bring to the table on top of who you are as a player. And that's what that, you know, them embracing me that way felt like.
Dame, when you left, at least from my perception, it seemed like you weren't a big fan of Joe Cronin. How did that relationship change? And when did it change? Like, when did it change for you that this is someone you want to play for and work with again?
I think toward the end, I think it was a lot of misunderstandings and miscommunication. And when something like that comes up, you know, people are hurt. You know, I'm not saying nothing, and then I'm seeing things that were said by me, you know, and now I'm looking at things sideways. So I think more than anything, it was miscommunication and misunderstandings. And Joe and I never sat down and talked about that. You know, it just kind of sat out there, and we let it be what it was, and I think that was the mistake. But I wouldn't say when I left, I just was not a big fan of Joe. Me and Joe had a great relationship, you know, the entire time before he became GM and while he was GM. But I think at that time, you know, it was a hard time, you know, like I was moving on and things were being said, like I said. So it was more a misunderstanding than anything. And the last game that we played here, you know, I went over before the game and I said hello to Joe. I said hello to Jody. And for me, I really wanted them to know that it was, you know, no hard feelings. You know, during that time when it was happening, sometimes when you're emotional, you handle things from a position of protecting yourself and not knowing what's going on, you know, on the other side. And then over time, you calm down and you figure it out. And, you know, I'm not a kid, so, you know, that wasn't hard for me to do. And it honestly wasn't even after that, it wasn't a long conversation to move past that. And I think that was because we never had a bad relationship, or it was never a dislike or us not being a fan of each other, like you said.
Dame, the Achilles can be such a devastating injury, and especially mentally for players. Did you go through the like self-pity, why me phase of that? And how does being back here maybe help with and having the resources that you have by being on the team here too, not just rehabbing here? How is that going to help you through what is, as you've said, an extremely long road ahead?
I mean, I literally, after I tore my Achilles and I felt it, and I was sitting on the floor, I grabbed it and I rolled over and I sat up, and the first thought that I had to myself was like, I'm about to come back from an Achilles. That was literally my first thought, like on my kids. That was the first thing I thought of. And we got to the back, and when the doctor said, you tore your Achilles, like, I think everybody else had more pity for me than I did. Like, I had the PTs, like, you know, about to cry and all of that stuff. Like, I didn't cry. Even when I got by myself, I didn't cry. And it wasn't like a prideful thing. My mind automatically went to, like, you know, I got to fight for something. You know, I know it's going to be a long journey. I know it's a challenge mentally, and I kind of shifted right there to what I knew was coming. And then it was, you know, just kind of learning more about it, you know, talking to Aaron Rodgers and KD and Rudy Gay, you know, all these guys that experienced it and handled it differently. But I never had that moment of like pity or any of those things with none of my injuries, honestly. But this one I know is like probably the biggest one of my career. And like you said, it's a mental battle, but you know, if I don't lose those. If it's a mental battle, those battles that I don't lose. If it's physical, it's possible, but a mental battle, I'm just not gonna lose.
Tyre Smith, K2 News. Dame, I got a question. When you left in 2023, you know, there were some of those team members that you kind of were familiar with, and now that you played against them a couple of times, how comfortable does this group make you that when you do return next season, you guys are going to be competing for some hardware?
I mean, just playing against them, but more than anything, watching them. You know, I was able to watch a lot of games. Like, we played, if I played a 7 o'clock game, by the time I would get home, it would be, you know, the West Coast games coming on. So I caught a lot of the games. And like I said, I watch closely. And, you know, I watch the Trailblazers specifically and I'm always looking like, how do I fit in? That's just my natural way of thinking, because to me, this is like my team. Like, this is who I've always seen myself with. So I watched it with that type of mentality, even if it was to never happen. And I saw how they competed. You know, I saw how they cheered for each other on the bench, you know, regardless of who was finishing the game. How they shared the ball. You know, one game I might see Shea go crazy, and then it might be Ant against us. And then, you know, Denny might have a 5-game stretch where he killing, and I'm just looking like, man, this is one of those teams that's coming along, you know. And like I said before, those same old teams are kind of aging out, and you know, you see OKC just won it this year, and you see Indiana snuck in there and made a run. And then you see like New York, you know, it's a lot of these younger teams, Houston, San Antonio, that's kind of like moving in. And even during the season, you know, I was telling my cousin that lived with me, like, I was putting the Blazers in that same category, you know, even though they're not one of these teams that people want to say it about. Because I watched so many games, I could see what was happening. And, you know, that's how I viewed the team.
Dame, can you just confirm how old your kids are now? I think Dame Jr. is 7, and the twins are almost 4.
Dame Jr. is 7, and the twins are 4. Yeah.
And has Dame Jr., now that you're going to be home full time, I assume he has started playing basketball, asked you if you'll be his coach on the sideline?
I'll be his coach?
Yeah. Now you're home full time. And
I'm not going to be a dad coach. I'm going to just, with my kids, like, I don't put no like pressure on them to try to be a basketball player. I didn't love playing basketball until I was like in the 4th or 5th grade, so it wasn't forced on me. And I made it to the NBA, so I don't force it on him. I just kind of let him find his way as Sonic and dinosaurs and Roblox and all of that stuff, and I let him find it on his own. My daughter is actually more of a competitor athlete, you know, thinks she can do everything. So I think that's the one that I may end up coaching someday, because that's probably the one. But as of now, I just let them be kids, you know, and that's it.
We are good to go. Appreciate y'all coming.
Alrighty, folks. Brendan Slaughter back here on the mic for the Rip City Drive / Blazers Courtside, whatever we want to call this little extra hour. But that's it, folks. The Damian Lillard press conference is in the books. Just under half an hour. So, again, I think just about everybody who was in the Portland media scene probably got a chance to ask a question there. And a lot to break down, a lot to kind of dive into. Again, if anybody has any immediate thoughts, We've got a call-in show going for about the next 13, 14 minutes or so before we wrap up for the night. But again, 503-248-0620. If you've got breaking thoughts on Damian Lillard, again, we'd love to hear from you. 503-248-0620. You can also check in on YouTube as well. Join us over there at 620 Rip City Radio. Again, hearing some positive things. The Orb says, Dame, it's interesting to see if, his style will fit into the Blazers' defensive and pass-first approach, but makes note that he doesn't play this year. We're going to break it down in detail tomorrow when we have the clips cut up and can kind of dive into the nuts and bolts of it. But my first reaction, this was an awesome press conference. Just like, some notes that I took. I mean, hearing Dame and Joe kind of address the elephant in the room of their relationship. Like that basically, when they were talking about like that timing before Dame was traded, how like we all kind of knew that like things were said where it's like, okay, somebody, requested a trade demand, whatever it was. And it really stood out to me that Dame mentioned there was never any, hard feelings. His last game at Moda Center, he said, he went to Joe Cronin and Jody Allen to say there were no feelings. Said over time, the emotions of it wear down. It wasn't a long conversation to move past it, and never a dislike or a bad relationship and why he's here. That stood out a lot because we can all remember how awkward it was for that time when the, quote, trade request came out. The Blazers were looking for the best deal for the franchise. That was ultimately not Miami. It was Milwaukee. So that was kind of interesting. And I and dare I say, not to say that he ever was, but gosh, Dame's like a grown-up now, folks. And I say that as somebody who's, 5-6 years older than me at the ripe age of 29. But just his Dame's maturity and like how he mentioned, like in the Achilles rehab, I believe it was Sean Hyken, our very own Sean Hyken, who asked Dame, was there any chance he would try to come back this season? And when Sean asked that question, and Dame, they're just kind of like, never say never. But when Dame was like, I'm a lot wiser now. Maybe the younger Dame would have tried to, push the limits. It's like they say, experience is not wisdom, so to speak. And I think wisdom is one of those things that comes with time. Regardless of wherever, whatever you're in, whether that's basketball, life, jobs, this or that. And I think Dame has clearly had a lot of time to reflect on just, how special his time was in Portland. I loved hearing the story about how he pulled up to the stoplight and, told his daughter that, they didn't have to get on a plane anymore to go see him play. I mean, that, that's kind of like what I was talking about last hour with Scotty Scheffler and his son. And it humanizes athletes. And I'm not even going to say that, Dame needed to be humanized, but I just think it definitely brings them down to a very relatable level. I think that's, it was just that part was really special. Couple other things that caught note. And again, if you're tuned in and have thoughts on the Damian Lillard press conference, we'll take your phone calls for another 10 minutes or so. 503-248-0620. Again, 503-248-0620. If you've got any thoughts on Damian Lillard, we'd love to hear them here on the Rip City Drive / Trailblazers courtside. Again, 503-248-0620. A couple other notes that I thought stood out from Dame's press conference. He mentioned the process of the signing was relatively smooth. He and the Blazers both had similar goals. It's nice to know that there wasn't like a whole lot of, discussing money. Obviously, the Blazers didn't have any more than the mid-level exception to give. But, the fact that there wasn't any controversy over that, contract terms, negotiations. I mean, Dame did get a no-trade clause, so that's pretty rare. I believe just he and LeBron James have that distinction now. So that was really cool to see. He mentioned he's been in contact with numerous doctors and physical therapists. It's been a slow process, but he said he wants to check every box, don't rush, and most importantly, folks, he said he expects to return to form. I'm sure every player would say that, but Damian Lillard, the mental aspect of it, and I forget which media member asked him about the mental part of it and whether or not he was able to allow himself to feel self-pity. Because whether it's anything, folks, whether like an injury is a specific example, but I'm sure we've all had situations where something has not gone our way in life, whether that's getting let go from a job, having a relationship not work out, name your pick, any number of things. And you kind of have, and I'll admit to even some of it myself in my life, where you have those moments where you ask yourself, why me? And it's not healthy to, sit in self-pity. I'm not saying I do either, but I think it's a natural kind of thing that happens to most people is you ask yourself, like, just why? And I found it so fascinating that Dame's like, oh, yeah, no, I rolled over, felt my Achilles, and was like, oh, yeah, it's time to come back from an Achilles. And it's just, that's the different mindset and the different mentality that Damian Lillard has compared to, just even, I'd say, the general public to an extent, because so many people like, let me put it in a context for me that's really relatable. Like when I mentioned earlier in the show, I love to go river floating. I love to float down the Clackamas River. For example, it's not 100% without its risks. I could, slip on a rock and, break my ankle or any of those number of things that can happen when you're out in like nature. And I tell you folks, if that happened to me, it would be at least 3-4 days of like, why me? Why me? The self-pity. And to hear that Dame that didn't even register, man, he's just a different breed. A couple other things that stood out. I really liked that he said the family. Like, we all assumed when the things came out, it's like, oh, Dame came here for family. We'd even heard some media members say the roster isn't maybe even as good as when he left. Well, Dame doesn't quite see it that way. He said it was a basketball decision, too. He likes the roster. He's been keeping tabs on the roster. He likes how the teams come together. It sounds like he's still pretty enamored with Shaedon Sharp's game. Maybe a little bit more positive on Scoot Henderson, considering the different terms and not drafting a guy to, take your position like a couple years ago. He said he liked, Scoot's game. He really mentioned Denny. And yeah, he's like, yeah, Denny can just, go for 20. I'm like, yeah, because Denny's a baller, man. I'm really excited for Denny. And I think more than anything, he also talked about how important it was to be home and be home with his family, keep his kids, from having to, travel cross country. One thing that I if I was there, I maybe would have jokingly asked Dame, like, another benefit's got to be the winters too, right? Because say what you will about Oregon winters, it ain't a Milwaukee winter, that's for sure. Lots of snow and really cold temperatures over there, so Dame don't got to worry about that no more either. A couple other things to mention with Dame is when he had the moment where he talked about, over the course of his basketball career, there were eventually times where he would not lose he could lose a physical battle, that could happen, but mentioned he won't lose a mental battle, period. And I think that was particularly impressive. Let's go ahead and head out to the phone lines. Looks like we got a couple coming in from the Couve. Let's start with Kenny. Kenny, what's going on, man? How are you? Welcome to Rip City Drive.
Hey, thanks, Brandon, for taking my call. I was just really impressed. Granted, I'm a super fan of Dame, but the thing is the incredible maturity, the incredible understanding of how the team is built now, and him understanding what he that he likes what he sees.
Right.
He wants to be a part of this, and as a team member, he wants to be a part of this. It's not like, oh yeah, it's going to be my show. You better
exactly.
No, there was never once anything he said that was down that road. He talked about how this is a defense team that gets up and down the floor. He talked about it. I think the thing is Dame will pattern his game to what's needed on this team, because that's who he is. He's not a dummy. He is in a lot of ways, he's a basketball savant. Because he understands the league. It's not just the league, it's all the teams he understands. He understands what he's going against. He understands what he's coming to. He loves the WNBA. He's just a basketball freak. And I think that to have a guy who's that passionate, you can't pay for that. You can't ask for that. It's either in the guy or it's not. The fire burns in him deeper than most.
Absolutely. And Kenny, I agree on all fronts and heavily appreciate the call. Thank you so much for calling in to Rip City Drive /courtside. Yeah, I definitely agree with you on the sense that the press conference was great to be able to get, Dame. The vibes were just awesome. Like I'm with you. I kind of am glad to see Dame back, and maybe I'm looking at it with some kind of more rose-colored glasses, but I think it was positive. That was a really fun press conference and maybe exceeded expectations as far as Dame didn't just come back here for family like everybody thought. Dame came here because he likes the basketball. And I'm looking at, like I said earlier in the show, it's a different circumstance, and you can't take situation A and situation B. But I tell you, folks, you don't think Dame would have loved to have wings like Denny and Tumani when he was in his prime? Oh, my goodness. All right, we got a few more minutes left. Let's go ahead and head out to Eddie in Vancouver as well. Want to have a few minutes for Eddie. Eddie, got a couple minutes here before we close up shop. What's on your mind, my friend?
You guys, Brandon, thanks for taking my call, you guys. I called in the day Lillard signed with the Blazers, but I'm going to do a big event court prediction. Damian Lillard, when he said he was on the ground and he's like, I got to heal from my Achilles, I always thought as soon as when he got signed that he's going to come back at the end of the season, we're going to be facing a play-in or something. And maybe it's going to be a little dinged up. He's going to come in and he's going to get us to playoffs. He's going to get us out of the play-in and get us to the playoffs. There's going to be some Rose City magic, But another thing that's great is guys like me who are 53 years old in a week. Now Damian Lillard being on our team makes it be a better chance of us winning the ring in my lifetime. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just happy to be part of Rip City. It's a good time to be a Blazer, you guys. So for all the haters who don't like Lillard being a Blazer, go somewhere.
I think I know what you're getting at, Eddie, and I appreciate the phone call. Thanks a bunch for tuning in. And for anyone that's out there as well, we got, like I said, we're just running up against the clock here, but I am also hosting the Rip City Drive tomorrow. We're going to have a bunch of the Damian Lillard audio ready to go and prepped for that. We're going to be breaking it down tomorrow, too. So highly encourage everyone to check back from 3 to 6 tomorrow. I can also tease we're going to have some fun guests to talk about it with. We're going to have Travis Demers coming in hot in the 3 o'clock hour tomorrow. And then 5 o'clock hour, we're going to have Sean Hyken in studio. So 2 guests that we're going to double down with Dame with. And I'm very excited to continue this Dame conversation because in a lot of ways, again, maybe it's rose-colored glasses, that press conference exceeded all my expectations. I loved everything that Dame was saying. I appreciate Eddie and Kenny from calling from Vancouver. You guys were awesome. Thanks so much for calling into the show, supporting us. We really appreciate it. And again, feel free to give us a call back in tomorrow. I agree with both those guys. The Blazer vibes are better. It's an awesome thing to have Dame back. And for this moment, at least, let's just enjoy the ride, enjoy the awesomeness of having the letter O back in Rip City. All right, folks, that's going to go ahead and do it for me today. I hope you guys have an awesome rest